Of all, please join the seats so that we can start the longest session in our working program for today, which is the second session about the Istanbul Convention, the gold standard in fighting violence against women. And I would also require a little bit of silence on the part behind the scene. As you know, the Istanbul Convention has been defined as the golden standard in fighting violence against women. This definition was not created by anyone involved in the elaboration of the Convention, whether the Parlamentary Assembly or the ad hoc committee which negotiated the text, or anyone else from the Council of Europe or the member states. That would be, let's say, pretentious. In fact, it was Mrs. Lakshmi Puri, acting head of UN Women, who did so last year in New York at the Commission for the Status on Women. The main focus of the CSW in 2013 was precisely violence against women and girls. The Istanbul Convention has indeed innovative features which make it a sophisticated and far-reaching text and a major reference, a standard to which many countries are looking for, including beyond our boundaries of our continent. I take this opportunity to remind that the convention, this was already done in the session in this morning, this convention is open to the accession by non-Council of Europe member states. It is not meant as a solely European instrument, but one with a much more large potential scope. So I just would like, before I give the word to our speakers, say the following. Many of us in this room, we are fathers and mothers of this convention. We have contributed, many of us, in the civil society, in the NGOs, in the parliaments, national parliaments, parliamentary assembly, in the staffs, in the members of the Council of Europe. Many of us, we have fought for this convention to be a reality. So this is our baby. We have been here accompanying this baby since the moment of conception until now, the moment where it's growing and it's developing. But it's our duty to accompany for the lifetime. I cannot wish a long life to this convention because I wish that this convention could have the shorter life as possible. That would mean that violence against women was really being eradicated. I cannot say that. But I can say that this convention has to be much more than a paper. It has to be a reality in the implementation. And for that implementation, it's not only the government's task, it's everybody's task. We, to be real mamas and dad and fathers, we have to take care of the baby and to make him have a healthy life so that what is his destiny of this convention can be really a reality by a proper monitoring on the application. So this is just the beginning. Now we look to our speakers for this session, and I have to jump, to make a small jump, which I apologize, but in reality, Mrs. Christine Schinken from the London School of Economics in the United Kingdom. She was supposed to speak a little bit later, but she has an airport to go and an airplane to take at 3 o'clock. She has to leave. She should leave this room at 3 o'clock. But with the permission of our introductory speaker, Mrs. Gisladotir, and of all the audience, I give immediately the floor to Mrs. Christine Schinken from the London School of Economics. And please, you are going to speak about integrated policies. So the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. And the apology is mine, not yours. So thank you very much, Mr. Bota, for doing that. I've been asked to highlight the comprehensive and holistic approach of the Istanbul Convention and to discuss why the integrated approach is important in seeking its purposes, effectively combating violence against women. Now, looking at the holistic approach means inevitably that I'm going to be repeating some of the things that were said this morning, but I hope also to add some of the further points that help make it a gold standard convention, as was just said. But a holistic approach emphasises the importance of the whole of a system, the entire architecture that is set up by the edifice, and the interdependence of all its parts. One can't look at one aspect of the issue in isolation from consideration of all the others and the interaction between them. So what the Istanbul Convention does is provide a system that is internally consistent, comprehensive in its coverage, and provides a coherent approach and practical measures for addressing violence against women. There are many aspects that I could look at to illustrate this holistic, integrated approach, so what I will do is just highlight 4 of them. First, and as has also been said, in negotiations it was made an express commitment at a very early stage to adopt the 3P approach. That is prevention, protection, and prosecution. And so we have these 3 Ps across the integration of the Convention. Each of these aspects is dealt with fully, combining detailed and practical measures, including, most importantly, the commitment to provide resources. In addition, the drafters recognised that the importance of a further P, that is policies. And so it included in the policies throughout the need for a gender-sensitive approach to policies. And from that flows one of the most important purposes of the Convention, the promotion of substantive equality between women and men, including through women's empowerment. This cannot be achieved without yet another P, participation. Participation in all levels of decision-making affecting women's lives. So that's the first aspect of holistic approach. Secondly, and again, as has been said, the Convention combines human rights principles, but importantly, drawing from and expanding existing international human rights law, as, for example, based in the European Convention on Human Rights and in CEDAW. So it is both a historic moment, a new convention, but a historic moment that's rooted in the past, building upon existing international legal standards. It has another dual nature. The Convention is both and simultaneously a human rights treaty and a criminal law treaty. As a human rights treaty, it emphasises the need to condemn discrimination as an immediate obligation. Again, that's not new. And emphasise substantive equality between women and men. It also has the most advanced discrimination clause of any international treaty. In the application of the treaty, states must ensure that there's no discrimination on a wide number of heads, including, importantly, and for the first time in international law, sexual orientation, gender identity, other categories such as migrant women, women with disabilities. The importance of the integration of that discrimination clause, anti-discrimination clause, I think can't be overemphasised. But further, it's not simply a classic human rights treaty, but a treaty that accepts and puts into binding form the advances in human rights conceptualisation that have taken place since the 1990s, but which have previously been located in soft law, i.e. non-legally binding instruments, or in human rights jurisprudence crafted to the particular case. It moves beyond the human rights understanding of vertical relationship between the state and the individual, making the state only responsible for acts directly attributable to it, the acts of state agents, but by recognising that violence against women is structural, a crucial social mechanism by which women are forced into a subordinate position compared with men, it has the positive obligations of states with respect to the acts of non-state actors, the obligation to exercise due diligence to prevent and protect against violence against women. Further, along with these positive measures, is the innovative and important, crucial requirement that states carry out a risk assessment of the lethality of any particular situation and take positive measures to manage risk. Many of the examples we've heard this morning have shown that state authorities were aware, should have been aware, of the imminent violence against women. The Convention requires them to assess that risk and take positive measures against that. The importance of positive measures. again, cannot be overemphasized. And again, because it was the topic of the whole session before lunch, I won't say any more about it, but the positive obligation to make transformative equality, not merely substantive equality, but transformative equality. As a criminal law treaty, as well as a human rights law treaty, it of course defines gender-based violence against women in a holistic way that encompasses the sites of violence, the family, the community, and the state, which we often tend to forget, identifies its multiple forms through defining a range of specific criminal offences, demonstrating both the breadth and diversity, yet commonality of the manifestations of violence against women. It brings coherence to the concept, highlighting that these acts are not random or chance, but are rooted in inequality and gender bias. This is furthered by the scope article that requires that the Convention is also applicable in armed conflict. It thus requires internalisation and incorporation of international standards and definitions, reform of national criminal law and procedure. This takes the Istanbul Convention beyond the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights, for example, and the jurisprudence of the Court in applying the European Convention to violence against women. The Court, and CEDAW similarly in its opinions, can only look at the actions of a particular state in a particular case to see if they are in violation of the Convention and make recommendations. The Istanbul Convention requires legislation and requires content to that legislation. Third, the third way in which it is holistic, it is both gender-specific, targeting and combating violence against women and girls, of course, as experienced by women and girls. For example, in its inclusion of economic and psychological violence, its recognition of the fear caused by stalking and harassment. But it's also gender-neutral in some ways, recognising the need to take account of other victims of violence and thus encouraging the application of the Convention to all victims of gender-based violence. Fourth, the Convention is holistic in that it requires a combination of efforts from many sources for its success. It provides for domestic proceedings in criminal and civil courts. It is multidisciplinary, rooted in sociological understandings of the prevalence and root causes of such violence. It requires social and educational measures. It brings in diverse players across government agencies, parliamentarians, national human rights institutions, the private sector, the information technology sector, media, professionals, civil society, men and boys. It is a total overview of the roles of different actors across society in this holistic and integrated way. The comprehensive coverage of the Convention is then supported, as I said earlier, by the fourth P, government policies. These must be gender sensitive and subject to scrutiny at the national level by the official government body that the government must create or designate under Article 10. This body, which I don't think has been mentioned this morning, is absolutely crucial in ensuring the integrated and holistic role of the Convention. It has four tasks: coordinating, implementing, monitoring and evaluating the policies and measures devised by government to give full effect to the Convention. It's also at the centre of ensuring research and collection of disaggregated data. Its designation and proper resourcing is therefore one of the core undertakings of the implementation of the Convention. In turn, the state's actions in implementing the Convention are subject to review and monitoring at the regional level by the committee of experts that will now be established, GREVIO. And again, most importantly, it is set out that victims and civil society must have information on and access to mechanisms of complaint, including GREVIO. So there's a layered structure working through from the national level up to the monitoring at the regional level. So what's the significance of this holistic approach? It brings together emerging standards with respect to violence against women from a range of other sources into a single legally binding instrument, combining legal processes with social and educational measures. It could be viewed in a linear way, from the important preemptive measures through emergency protective procedures, processes for individual accountability, long-term structural and systemic transformation of government agencies and social attitudes. Through education and training, heard, as we've said this morning, that is very much focused on the real purposes of the Convention, is based upon professional understanding and upon reliable research and data. It's not just linear, it's also cyclic. The Convention is holistic in its own terms, it spells out that, but it's holistic as well in that it forms part of a wider system of international law. It complements and supplements the work of the European Court of Human Rights, the work of the CEDAW Committee, even the work of the Security Council with respect to its Women, Peace and Security agenda. As a standard-setting instrument, it may form a catalyst for global acceptance of normative standards for combating violence against women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine Chinken. We wish you a very good flight back home, and we continue our works now, yes, with the introductory speech. We have here with us Mrs. Ingebjörg Gisladottir. She is the Regional Director for Europe and Central Asia of the UN Women. Thank you very much for being here today with us. And you know, UN Women is a major player in the field of the women's rights at the global level, and specifically also on fighting on violence. Your contribution will be an opportunity to learn more about the impact you think that Istanbul Convention can have in this fight for us all. Thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, ministers, parliamentarians, activists. It gives me a pleasure to be with you here today to celebrate the Istanbul Convention, and I think we have a lot to celebrate. The Istanbul Convention has finally entered into force after 3 years of hard work on the part of many here that are present here today, and many, many others as well. I think we can take a moment to congratulate ourselves. We have secured 22 signatories and 14 ratifications for the Istanbul Convention. What this means is that in the 14 countries that have ratified the Convention, women can be assured of a government response to violence that conforms with the gold standard, which is what the Istanbul Convention has widely and rightly been hailed as. The Istanbul Convention has also helped to set high standards elsewhere because of its strong and explicit focus on prevention, which has been embedded within international agreements, such as the agreed conclusion of the 57th session on the Commission of the Status of Women, on the prevention and elimination of all forms of violence against women and girls. It is right that we are coming together to celebrate the entry into force of the Convention, but this time for me is also marked by sober reflection. We need more than 14 countries ratifying the Convention. We need more to be done. At UN Women, we are all too aware that violence against women and girls is a global menace. It is the most pervasive and pernicious violation of women's human rights occurring in all countries, contexts, and settings. Every hour, every day, every week brings new horrors. In our own backyard, that's to say the European Union, 1 in 3 women has experienced some form of physical and or sexual violence since the age of 15, as we heard about this morning. This is a figure that reflects the global average. I could mention a lot of figures here, but I'm not going to do that. We've already heard them this morning. I'm just going to mention one, which I find maybe the most disturbing numbers of all, and that is that 67% of the women that were surveyed by the European Union did not report the most serious incident of violence to the police or any other organization. This chronic underreporting means that while the present numbers we have are shocking, the real numbers may be far greater. Elsewhere in the world, that's to say not in the European Union, but in other countries, it is estimated that 603 million women live in a country where domestic violence is not even considered a crime. It is important to tackle violence against women and girls, both in the private and public space, head on. And now I quote from the recent European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights survey, and I quote, "Gender-based violence that disproportionately affects women is an extensive human rights abuse that the European Union cannot afford to overlook," and I unquote. We welcome the 14 ratifications and 22 signatories to the Istanbul Convention, but we need more. We need more within Europe and beyond its boundaries. We need every woman in every country in the world to be assured that her government is doing everything it possibly can in the areas of prevention, protection and services, prosecution, laws and policies to ensure that she is able to live free from violence. From women in urban centers like New Delhi and Copenhagen, to women in rural communities in sub-Saharan Africa and the steppes of Central Asia, let no woman be left behind. We who work on women's rights know that 2015 is a historic year for us. The convergence of Beijing plus 20, that's to say we are celebrating that there are 20 years since the Beijing Declaration of Action was adopted, that the convergence of that declaration with the finalization of the Sustainable Development Goals presents a unique and unprecedented opportunity for us to ensure that women's rights are at the heart and soul of our planet's development agenda for our foreseeable future. As of today, the proposal for the proposed Sustainable Development Goals includes the standalone gender goal. It's Goal 5, which is, and I quote, "to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls." That's a big promise. And gender is also mainstreamed across the other goals. Eliminating all forms of violence against women and girls in public and private spheres, as well as all harmful practices, are among the key indicators under Goal 5. The new framework will be a universal one, and the Istanbul Convention will be a means to holding countries accountable to achieving their ending violence against women obligations under the new framework. The reinforced body of international law and global policy on gender equality, the empowerment of women and ending violence against women, such as the CEDAW Convention and other human rights conventions, several UN resolutions, all the way from Resolution 1325 that was adopted in 2000 to Resolution 2122 adopted last year. There are now 7, these resolutions. The Millennium Development Goals and the Beijing Platform for Action taken together form a powerful normative framework which government officials and gender equality advocates in turn use to further their actions at the regional and country levels. The Council of Europe's Istanbul Convention is a welcome addition to this framework as it draws from but also complements and expands existing instruments. Let us never forget, though, that the crux of all the work that we do is implementation, as has been mentioned here already. UN Women supports governments around the world, often in partnership with other UN entities, in developing inclusive laws, policies and programs addressing violence against women. Comprehensive legal frameworks, as well as enforcement mechanisms and multi-sectoral services, not only respond to and protect women and girls from violence, but also send a clear message that such violence is not acceptable and will never be tolerated. UN Women has worked with many countries in Europe and Central Asia, often in concert with the Council of Europe, to push for the signature and ratification of the Convention. And we will continue to do that while we support its implementation. We stand ready to work with any government that requests support to implement the Istanbul Convention. Our Essential Services Global Joint Program, it's a joint global program called Essential Services that was developed in partnership with the United Nations Population Fund, is designed to fill the gap between international commitments and country-level activities for responding to gender-based violence. It will assist countries in fulfilling their international obligations to provide quality services, as well as increase access to services for women and girls, irrespective of where they live. But I also want to mention here UN Women's Global Safe Cities initiative, which is accessible to all European cities throughout our regional office in Istanbul. And it is working with governments, civil society, private sector, UN agencies, and other partners to create safe public spaces, both with and for women and girls. And I think this is a vital issue for all cities of the world, because as was mentioned here this morning, 50% of the women that were interviewed in the European Union survey mentioned that they avoid specific spaces because of fear. And this we need to change. We need to make cities safe for women as for men. We at UN Women are doing everything we can to bridge the gap between rhetoric and reality, and we urge you to join us in this fight. As much as we are doing, we need to do more, much more. Responses to violence against women are important, but do not suffice to reduce and eliminate such violence. More needs to be done in preventing such violence before it occurs by addressing its root causes, such as structural gender inequality and harmful gender stereotypes. We need to make sure that whatever we are doing is empowering for women and girls, recognizing them as agents for real change and supporting them in realizing their full potential. The message cannot be repeated enough times. Violence is never acceptable, under any circumstances, in any context, in any culture, in any country. Women have the right to live lives free from violence, the right to wear what they want, to go where they want, and to be who they want. So let us now, with partners such as the Council of Europe, other UN agencies, governments, and civil society advocates across the world, focus on implementation and action to work towards ending violence against all women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Gisela Dottir, for your impressive speech. Let me, first of all, just to inform you, and forgive me, but I forgot to tell you, our colleagues from Italy, our delegation, they say that if any member of the audience, they wish to go to visit the Parliament, and they did not so before, at the end of our works, there will be another tour guided to the Parliament. So if you wish to go, you had not the opportunity, you have a second chance now. Thank you very much. So as I said, look, from the figures of the FRA survey, the one that frightens me most is the one that says that 2/3 of the women, they did not denunciate the violence from partners. 2/3. And outside of this partnership, 3/4 of the women, they did not denunciate it. This frightens me because it says that all the statistics that we have been knowing up to now, they don't mean anything. The reality is much worse than that. Because for any reason, for many reasons, the women, they don't go and they don't denounce the violence that they suffer. That is, for me, the worst. So the next speaker is also touching a very, very important point of this convention, is that Article 11, for instance, the data collection is crucial. We need to know the reality to have good policies. So, Mrs. Carmona Vergara, you are the president of the Observatory on Gender and Domestic Violence in Spain. And you know that the Istanbul Convention requires state parties to cooperate closely with the civil society. It advocates cooperation between all stakeholders, among other things to ensure effective knowledge of the problem, being aware of the prevalence of violence against women, having accurate data on victims, perpetrators, types of violence is crucial to all those who are involved in fighting. So, Mrs. Carmona Vergara, you have the floor.
Grazie. Buonasera. È un onore per me rappresentare la Spagna in questa conferenza che celebra l'entrata in vigore della Convenzione di Istanbul, il trattato internazionale di maggiore rilievo nella lotta contro la violenza nei confronti delle donne, considerata come una grave violazione di diritti umani. In Spagna esiste una grande preoccupazione istituzionale per progredire nelle politiche che tutelano le vittime della violenza domestica e di genere e dal 2004 viene adottato un approccio integrato, multidisciplinare e coordinato per sradicare questo tipo di violenza discriminatoria che viola la dignità umana. È considerato un problema strutturale e politico che implica un deciso impegno da parte di tutte le istituzioni e della società in generale. Un buon esempio è rappresentato dalla legge organica 1/2004 sulle misure di protezione integrate alle vittime di violenza di genere, che affronta questa piaga dal punto di vista sociale, sanitario, giudiziario, della sicurezza, educativo e dei mezzi di comunicazione. La legge è stata approvata all'unanimità dal Parlamento spagnolo il 28 dicembre e è stata pubblicata nel bollettino ufficiale dello Stato spagnolo il giorno seguente. Come si dice nell'esposizione delle motivazioni, l'obiettivo fondamentale della legge è quello di prevenire, sanzionare, ridurre e sradicare le importanti cifre di violenza che subiscono le donne, frutto di rapporti di potere, di dominio e discriminazione che hanno inflitto da sempre alcuni uomini, specialmente nell'ambito dei rapporti di coppia esistenti o ormai conclusi. La legge vuole incidere e agire contro quella che rappresenta la vera e propria epidemia sociale in Spagna, la violenza di genere perpetrata dagli uomini nei confronti delle donne nei rapporti di coppia esistenti o conclusi. Questo è l'ambito di applicazione della legge, così come si stabilisce nell'articolo primo della stessa, ambito che viene esteso anche ai figli e alle figlie delle vittime dirette dell'ambito familiare. La legge vuole tener conto delle raccomandazioni degli organismi internazionali e giustifica la sua approvazione nell'articolo 9.2 della Costituzione spagnola, che obbliga i poteri pubblici a eliminare tutti quegli ostacoli che limitano o ostacolano il fatto che i diritti fondamentali delle persone siano una realtà, tra cui il diritto all'uguaglianza reale tra gli uomini e le donne. Per la prima volta si affronta un problema da tutti i punti di vista possibili, data sua radice fino alle sue ultime conseguenze. La legge parte dal presupposto che la violenza di genere è un problema di carattere trasversale che colpisce tutti i settori della società e richiede soluzioni che incidono sulla molteplicità delle sue cause e effetti. Per questo la risposta istituzionale vuole essere globale e con decisioni che abbiano forza di legge, e stabilendo misure educative di sensibilizzazione contro la pubblicità illecita, di prevenzione, di protezione sociale ed economica, di tutela istituzionale, penale e giudiziaria. La legge affronta la necessità della specializzazione di tutti gli operatori che si coordinano per lottare contro la violenza di genere. Per questo crea organi giudiziari specializzati in questa materia, incaricati di istruire e giudicare i fatti penali come il Tribunale della violenza nei confronti delle donne, il Tribunale penali e le sezioni dei tribunali provinciali specializzati in questa materia. Crea altresì istituzioni come la Delegazione del Governo contro la violenza di genere, collegata al Ministero della Sanità, Servizi Sociali e di Uguaglianza, un osservatorio statale e una procura specializzata e gruppi specializzati nelle forze di sicurezza dello Stato. I giudici e i magistrati, nonché gli avvocati che lavorano in tali tribunali, hanno dovuto frequentare obbligatoriamente un corso specifico su questa materia e continuano a formarsi nel corso della loro carriera professionale. Il coordinamento delle istituzioni pubbliche viene definito attraverso piani di collaborazione e protocolli di azione, incluso il protocollo di azione delle forze e di corpi di sicurezza e di coordinamento con gli organi giudiziari per la protezione delle vittime della violenza domestica e di genere e il protocollo di azione sanitaria che obbliga a inviare al pubblico ministero e al tribunale di turno tutti i certificati medici dove sono diagnosticare lesioni alle vittime di violenza di genere. Un importante passo avanti era l'introduzione dell'ordine di protezione integrata. L'ordine di protezione è una risoluzione giudiziaria che consagra lo statuto di protezione integrata delle vittime di violenza domestica e di genere, mediante l'adozione da parte di uno stesso organo giudiziario di misure cautelari penali o civili, attivando altre misure di assistenza sociale. La legge 27/2003 del 31 luglio, che regola l'ordine di protezione delle vittime della violenza domestica attraverso un procedimento giudiziario veloce e semplice davanti al Tribunale per le indagini preliminari, vuole che la vittima della violenza domestica possano ottenere uno statuto integrato di protezione, che comprende misure civili, penali ed assistenza, nonché di protezione sociale. L'ordine di protezione è una risoluzione giudiziaria che, nei casi in cui esistano indizi fondati sulla commissione di reati o infrazioni di violenza di genere o domestica ed esista una situazione oggettiva del rischio per la vittima, ordina la sua protezione mediante l'adozione di misure cautelari, civili, penali e attiva la misura di assistenza e protezione sociale necessarie mediante il trasferimento dell'ordine di protezione agli centri di coordinamento della comunità autonome. C'è anche un registro gestito dal Ministero della Giustizia che rappresenta una banca dati informatizzata di ambito nazionale e che contiene le condanne e le misure di sicurezza imposte nelle sentenze per reati o infrazioni e misure cautelari e ordini di protezione stabilite nei procedimenti penali per violenza domestica e di genere. Allo stesso modo, le forze di sicurezza dello Stato hanno un proprio sistema di gestione delle informazioni per monitorare tutti i casi segnalati facendo una valutazione del rischio della vittima in tempo reale. Questi registri forniscono informazioni ai tribunali, al pubblico ministero, alla polizia giudiziaria, alla comunità autonoma, alle delegazioni e sottodelegazioni del governo per dare corso alle cause penali e civili, adottare, modificare, attuare e monitorare le misure di protezione e assistenza. Le decisioni politiche e la legislazione spagnola quindi si adattano pienamente alla Convenzione di Istanbul per quanto riguarda l'integrità e la globalità del trattamento della violenza nei confronti della donna. La legge organica vieta la mediazione nei procedimenti giudiziari relativi alla violenza nei confronti delle donne, così come stabilisce la Convenzione. Per quanto riguarda la necessità di implementare una rigorosa raccolta di dati statistici, il Piano Statistico Nazionale rappresenta il principale strumento che ordina l'attività statistica dell'amministrazione dello Stato. La delegazione del governo per la violenza di genere, come organo che coordina tali dati in adempimento dei principi di massimo rigore scientifico e di affidabilità delle statistiche a disposizione della cittadinanza, ha incluso nel piano statistico nazionale, con il giudizio favorevole della Commissione permanente del Consiglio Superiore di Statistica, tutte le operazioni statistiche relative alla violenza di genere, includendo la statistica delle vittime mortali per violenza di genere ad opera dei loro compagni o ex compagni. Chiamate al 016, servizio telefonico permanente di informazione e assistenza giuridica in materia di violenza di genere. Sistema di monitoraggio attraverso mezzi telematici delle misure di allontanamento nell'ambito della violenza di genere. Servizio telefonico di assistenza e protezione per la vittima della violenza di genere. statistica sugli aiuti sociali alle donne vittime della violenza di genere, macro sondaggio sulla violenza nei confronti delle donne, sondaggio per il miglioramento della conoscenza sull'uguaglianza e sulla prevenzione della violenza di genere nell'adolescenza e tra i giovani universitari. Il Consejo General del Poder Judicial, il Consiglio Superiore della Magistratura, raccoglie tutti i dati relativi all'attività giudiziaria dei tribunali con competenza in questa materia in maniera trimestrale e allestisce rapporti sull'evoluzione delle denunce, delle rinunce al procedimento, degli ordini di protezione, delle sentenze e di altre azioni giudiziarie, pubblicandole e inviandole all'organo di coordinamento che ogni mese pubblica i bollettini statistici nella sua pagina web. La violenza nei confronti delle donne continua ad essere una priorità nelle agende politiche spagnole. I passi avanti più recenti raggiunti nel nostro Paese in questa materia sono i seguenti. È l'elaborazione di una strategia nazionale per la lotta a favore dell'eradicamento della violenza nei confronti delle donne con più di 250 misure concrete che coinvolge in pratica tutte le istituzioni pubbliche dello Stato e che include inoltre misure contro altre forme di violenza come la tratta di esseri umani o la mutilazione genitale femminile. Il progetto di legge di riforma del codice penale che estende la risposta sanzionatoria all'aggressore e che protegge la vittima della violenza di genere e nei confronti della tratta delle donne e bambine a scopo di sfruttamento sessuale mediante la tipizzazione di nuovi reati come il matrimonio forzoso, lo stalking, il bullismo online, la manipolazione di dispositivi elettronici di monitoraggio, nonché con l'introduzione della libertà vigilata come misura di sicurezza per prevenire la pericolosità dell'aggressore. Il progetto di legge sull'assistenza giuridica gratuita amplia questo beneficio non solo dal momento della presentazione della denuncia per tutte le donne, indipendentemente dalle loro risorse economiche, bensì anche in un momento anteriore alla denuncia esposta davanti alla polizia o al tribunale affinché le vittime ricevano la massima informazione da personale specializzato. Il progetto di legge dello Statuto della Vittima pone al centro del procedimento la parte lesa dalla violenza di genere, le donne, i loro figli e loro figlie, e disciplina il suo accesso a tutte le informazioni giudiziarie e penitenziarie e il suo diritto a essere ascoltata per tutte le risoluzioni che vengono adottate. L'Osservatorio della violenza domestica di genere è stato creato nel 2002. È formato dal Consejo General del Poder Judicial, che lo presiede, 3 ministri per gli affari interni, della giustizia e della sanità, da servizi sociali e di uguaglianza.
Signora Carmona,
sì.
Le peço che termini, per favore.
Ok, termino. Dalla Procura Generale dello Stato, dal Consiglio Generale di Procuratori Legali dalla Spagna e da tutta la comunità autonoma con competenze trasferite in materia di giustizia. Termino in questo osservatorio nel campo della sensibilizzazione concede premi annuali di riconoscimento alla persona, istituzione o associazione che maggiormente spicca nel processo di sradicamento della violenza domestica di genere. Questo anno il premio è stato conferito a Tel Maldana, Procuratore Generale dello Stato del Guatemala, e a FRA, l'Agenzia dei diritti fondamentali dell'Unione Europea. Congratulations, Morten. Grazie.
Muchas gracias, señora Carmona, por compartir con nosotros la experiencia magnífica de España, que tiene tanto para decir que yo diría que una conferencia no sería suficiente para hablar de todo lo que se ha hecho y muy bien en España. Well, now we move to the second part of our session. We have already spoken a lot and well in the morning and in the first part of this session about the prevention. Now we're going to prosecution, bringing justice home for all women victims of violence. And in this part of our session, we will listen to 3 different approaches from people that deal today, every day, with the violence against women cases. So that's the case that we have the opportunity to listen to a magistrate, to a police officer, and a civil servant on the social services. So there are three different perspectives and from different countries. I mean, from Italy and Sweden. So it's important that we share also with these speakers. We will start by listening to Mrs. Maria Monteleone. She is a magistrate specialized on cases of violence against women. Please talk to us about your experience on the field.
Grazie. Ringrazio innanzitutto la Camera dei Deputati ed in particolare la signora Presidente Laura Boldrini per il privilegio e l'onore che mi ha riservato con l'invito a questo importante convegno, che costituisce per me non soltanto una grande opportunità per conoscere ed approfondire meglio il fenomeno della violenza di genere, che ho la responsabilità di contribuire a contrastare, ma anche perché mi ha offerto in questo modo l'occasione per concorrere a migliorare in futuro l'azione della magistratura ed anche quella di tutte le forze dell'ordine. Abbiamo più volte sentito oggi qui in questa sede, ed è stato anche ripetuto in questi ultimi minuti, che la violenza contro le donne rappresenta una delle principali violazioni dei diritti umani dai costi sociali rilevanti. Io devo anche aggiungere che è anche un fenomeno criminale al quale occorre dare una risposta integrata, nella quale assumono un ruolo decisivo l'intervento di rete e i collegamenti tra i settori che affrontano le situazioni violente, i percorsi di prevenzione, di rilevazione, di intervento e di tutela. In tale percorso, per rendere giustizia davvero alle vittime, occorre innanzitutto conoscere il fenomeno criminale, mettere in campo un sistema giudiziario che abbia un'efficacia reale e non da ultimo assicurare un'effettiva protezione alla vittima, facendosi anche carico del suo diritto a vedersi riconoscere i diritti derivanti dal reato, il risarcimento dei dei danni derivanti dal reato. Per questo un corretto esercizio dell'azione giudiziaria richiede una specializzazione delle forze di polizia, della magistratura e dell'avvocatura ed un approccio integrato nell'applicazione della legge penale, come richiede la Convenzione di Istanbul all'articolo 1, lettera E. L'adeguamento delle misure cautelari a protezione della vittima e l'elaborazione di modalità operative che assicurino anche nel tempo effettività della tutela, oltre ad un'attenta e capace valutazione e gestione del rischio di letalità. La previsione di sanzioni e misure repressive che siano davvero efficaci, proporzionate e soprattutto dissuasive. Condividendo la previsione della Convenzione di Istanbul, dobbiamo auspicare inoltre che l'azione giudiziaria sia ulteriormente potenziata con misure di monitoraggio e di sorveglianza della persona condannata. A tale proposito, va ricordato che l'Italia si è concretamente impegnata nel contrasto alla violenza di genere con recenti modifiche legislative di natura sostanziale e processuale. Mi riferisco alla legge 119 del 2013, recante disposizioni per il contrasto alla violenza di genere, e anche alla precedente legge di ratifica della Convenzione di Lanzarote, la numero 172 del 2012. Debbo sottolineare che sebbene dette normative siano state inserite in un sistema penale e processuale che si dibatte in alcune difficoltà operative, esse tuttavia hanno già consentito, con l'impegno delle forze dell'ordine, della magistratura e delle organizzazioni che operano sul territorio, di mettere in campo interventi più tempestivi e specialistici, conseguendo alcuni risultati apprezzabili sul piano della repressione e della tutela delle vittime, ai quali farò cenno da qui a breve. Per meglio comprendere come in questo settore il servizio giustizia possa meglio rispondere alle esigenze delle donne, e tra queste intendiamo le bambine, le giovani, le meno giovani, le molte donne anziane. Dobbiamo innanzitutto prendere atto e prendere comunque le mosse da un'effettiva conoscenza e analisi del fenomeno criminale che dobbiamo contrastare. L'osservazione della realtà giudiziaria in questa materia ci disegna un quadro assolutamente allarmante che merita la nostra massima attenzione. Ci si riferisce non soltanto ai delitti cosiddetti istantanei, violenza sessuale, lesioni volontarie, minacce, ingiurie, percosse, violenza privata, ma soprattutto quei fatti criminosi che sono caratterizzati per la loro stessa natura da una componente di abitualità, i maltrattamenti contro familiari e conviventi e gli atti persecutori, lo stalking. L'incidenza di siffatti fenomeni criminali nella società è resa plasticamente dalle statistiche dei nostri uffici giudiziari. Il mio riferimento specifico è al Tribunale e alla Procura di Roma. I dati evidenziano un crescente e costante aumento delle iscrizioni delle nuove notizie di reato, un aumento costante delle applicazioni delle misure cautelari coercitive nei confronti del violento, imposte da un inarrestabile incremento delle aggressioni fisiche che sfociano spesso in lesioni gravi, gravissime, fino al femminicidio. Occorre prendere atto che la violenza di genere e quella domestica assumono sempre più di frequente forme e caratteristiche tali da rendere necessario l'intervento di misure restrittive del violento che siano capaci di interrompere la catena di offese e di neutralizzare l'elevato rischio di reiterazione del reato che è tipicamente connesso a questo tipo di fenomenologia criminosa. In questo ambito debbo sottolineare che sempre più spesso le misure più lievi dell'allontanamento dalla casa familiare e del divieto di avvicinamento alla vittima si rivelano del tutto insufficienti, imponendosi sempre più di frequente l'applicazione della custodia cautelare in carcere. Merita anche attenzione e ponderazione l'ulteriore dato costituito dall'aumento costante degli arresti in flagranza di reato, necessari per interrompere l'aggressione in atto e tutelare fin da subito la vittima da ulteriori e più gravi conseguenze, spesso accresciute dall'avvenuta denuncia. Per valutare le reali dimensioni della violenza di genere, poi, non ci si può fermare alla valutazione del numero, seppure drammatico, delle donne uccise da un uomo quasi sempre a lei molto vicino, ma dobbiamo considerare anche tutti i tentati femminicidi, nei quali l'uccisione della vittima è un anello mancante per mera casualità. Dobbiamo aggiungere le lesioni volontarie gravissime che producono effetti permanenti di disabilità e non da ultimo i devastanti effetti psicologici che ricadono anche su chi assiste alla violenza. In tale quadro il ruolo affidato alle forze dell'ordine e alla magistratura è essenziale. Ad essi è richiesta la predisposizione di strategie operative specifiche e l'adozione di iniziative di contrasto, ma la cornice normativa nella quale tali istituzioni si trovano ad operare non è sempre adeguata rispetto ai fini da perseguire. Ciò comporta che in questi settori criminali l'azione giudiziaria deve avere la sensibilità e la capacità di adeguare i modelli operativi facendosi anche carico di nuove ed inderogabili funzioni. Sotto questo aspetto vorrei dedicare alcune riflessioni alle necessità che anche il legislatore italiano, che pure nella materia è già intervenuto con modifiche legislative importanti, dovrà prendere in considerazione per dare concreta ed effettiva attuazione alla Convenzione di Istanbul. Osservo che un'efficace lotta alla violenza di genere richiede approcci investigativi di tipo specialistico, e ciò in ragione della specificità dei fenomeni criminali da contrastare, e quindi occorre ridefinire il ruolo repressivo dello Stato e l'intero impianto processuale penale. E ciò non soltanto nella sfera dei rapporti tra forze di polizia e magistratura, ma anche nel ruolo che nella sede processuale va riconosciuto alla persona offesa e all'avvocatura. Consideriamo che nei casi in cui le aggressioni assumono dimensioni di abitualità, la denuncia della parte offesa interviene molto spesso in un momento ormai avanzato nella progressione criminosa, quando ormai le violenze hanno raggiunto una soglia tale da non poter essere più tollerate e si ricorre all'intervento dell'autorità giudiziaria. Si tratta molto spesso di una scelta per la vittima che giunge all'esito di una lunghissima serie di aggressioni, di vessazioni, umiliazioni e soprusi, comportamenti abituali che la donna non ha avuto il coraggio di denunciare all'atto del loro verificarsi. Questo è un fenomeno che non può essere ignorato da chi riceve la notizia di reato, che ha il dovere di rapportarsi con la vittima con modalità appropriate. Questo rilievo ci porta anche a fare un'ulteriore riflessione, che in troppi casi l'uccisione di una donna è preceduta da episodi di violenza sintomatici e premonitori, spesso drammaticamente minimizzati dalla stessa vittima e anche da chi le è più vicino, o colpevolmente trascurati, talvolta anche dagli stessi organi inquirenti. Per questo non possiamo sottovalutare le numerose situazioni familiari conflittuali che assumono una prima visibilità giudiziaria attraverso semplici denunce di ingiurie, minacce e lesioni volontarie, cui troppo di frequente fa seguito la remissione della querela. Sotto questo profilo, la Convenzione di Istanbul contiene un forte richiamo alla responsabilità di tutte le istituzioni e richiede agli Stati firmatari impegni precisi, dettando regole che riteniamo efficaci e condivisibili sia sul piano sostanziale che processuale. In attesa delle opportune nuove riforme, debbo dare atto che il legislatore italiano, con le modifiche legislative che ho appena richiamato, ha introdotto già nel nostro sistema penale delle disposizioni coerenti e che sono anche anticipatorie delle norme contenute nella Convenzione di Istanbul e che hanno in concreto determinato importantissimi effetti sul piano dell'azione giudiziaria, favorendo interventi più tempestivi. Un primo importante risultato è quello di avere determinato un più stretto e tempestivo raccordo tra magistrato inquirente e forze di polizia giudiziaria, fin dalle primissime fasi dell'intervento, spesso nella flagranza di reato. Ciò è stato reso possibile dall'introduzione della nuova misura precautelare dell'allontanamento urgente dall'abitazione familiare e del violento, già prevista nella Convenzione di Istanbul.
Dottoressa Monteleone, le prego che
mi avvio a
definire.
concludere. Devo dire, aggiungo una sola considerazione, che sul piano operativo la magistratura italiana e le forze dell'ordine, impegnati concretamente a rendere effettive queste disposizioni, si sono date delle nuove e più efficaci strutture organizzative attraverso la creazione di magistrati specializzati che si occupano in esclusiva di questa materia, ed in questa prospettiva e nell'ambito delle direttive tracciate anche dal Consiglio Superiore della Magistratura, va detto che è stata istituita presso la Procura della Repubblica di Roma un turno 24 ore su 24 per tutto l'anno di un pool di magistrati specializzati che sono sempre reperibili e contattabili dalle forze di polizia che operano sul territorio. Concludo facendo semplicemente due brevissime riflessioni, perché davvero riusciamo a rendere la nostra attività quotidiana effettiva ed efficace perché possiamo essere davvero capaci di rendere giustizia alle donne vittime di violenza. superando pregiudizi e stereotipi consolidati, talvolta devo dire presenti anche tra le forze dell'ordine e gli organi inquirenti, dobbiamo condividere due affermazioni. La violenza di genere e quella domestica non può essere considerata un fatto privato, perché non riguarda il semplice rapporto tra l'autore e la vittima, ma incide profondamente sulle fondamenta della famiglia ed incide quindi sull'intera società. Rendere giustizia significa anche fare tutto ciò che è necessario per liberare la vittima dalla paura, perché acquisisca consapevolezza dei propri diritti e comprenda che il potere e la capacità di sopraffazione dell'uomo non sta nella sua forza, ma anche nell'acquiescenza della donna a tale sopraffazione. In questo il processo penale, arricchito dei principi della Convenzione di Istanbul e dell'esperienza giuridica condivisa di tutti i Paesi firmatari, può essere davvero una grande occasione di riscatto, perché la violenza contro le donne non è solo una violazione dei principali dei diritti umani, ma un fenomeno criminale che frena l'evoluzione ed il progresso dei popoli. Grazie.
I believe all the speeches that we have been listening, they are precious. And I also ask Dr. Monteleone to give us a copy of your speech so that with time we can take all the suggestions that are very relevant and important that you are doing there. So please excuse us, but I have to manage the time, and the time is not elastic. So now we go a little more to the north, to Sweden. You know, Sweden is a country where gender equality is one of the top priorities for a long time, and they have made quite advances on all these issues, including on violence against women. We have here today with us, as I said before, but Mrs. Anna Gustafsson is superintendent and project leader in the Scan County Police Authority. And also Mrs. Margot Olsen is the coordinator of the Integrated Domestic Violence Program at the Central Administration of Social Services of Malmö. So I give the floor to you, and you manage by your own the 10 minutes you have available together. So it's a duo.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us to Rome and this important issue. Margot and I have worked together in this issue and developed this issue since '98, and we have done it local and national wide in Sweden. We are now present a model which is developed with help from experience from staff and survivors. It's a client-oriented model, and it's a mission from the Swedish government's action plan to 2007, Men's Violence Against Women.
And we're standing here together because we think it's necessary not only to talk together, we have to work together.
So this is a chart for authorities and organizations, NGOs, contacts an abused women may need or must take when she are abused and she's around with her children. When we began work with this developing the model for the interagency cooperation on the basis of the abused women's perspective, we mapped all possible contacts she may need to change the situation, and we asked ourselves, would we like to take 30 contacts when I'm abused? Are you? No was the answer. We would like all actors in one place, a one-stop shop. With this realization, we started the progress. The Swedish government's action plan from 2007, Measure 50, is Project Karin. The National Police Board should take steps to develop a cycle environment that specially adapts to the investigation of crimes of violence and other forms of abuse directed to the women. The location, design and furnishing, and the choice of technical equipment and other aids has to be based on an adapt to the situation of women at risk. The overall aim of this assessment is to develop a model for national-wide use. Project Karin has been developed in 2 stages. The first mission was based on a female victim and evaluated by Lund University through questionnaires and interviews. What does a woman need? Women and desired for contemporary efforts to their children and also to the perpetrators. Another wishes were extended interaction with additional players. Many women get health problems and it can result also in unemployment. Violence against women is a society problem, and the government gave us a second mission to develop Karin from a holistic perspective. And the purpose of Karin is better coordination between the authorities to ensure that appropriate risk assessment are carried out, to improve the investigation, to provide crisis support and protection of women and children, to increase motivation and treatment of offenders. And now, from planning to act.
Yes. As you can see here is a model of how we work, because Concept Karin or Project Karin it's a one-stop shop. So it's a place where the woman can go and she could get many sorts of help at the same time. And it starts with a police investigation and a police report, and then we have parallel processes, because we both have criminal justice and the criminal process, and we have a social process and a social services help at the same time. And you can see here is the police report, and at first, of course, the police has to ensure that we have all the evidence, and the prosecutor is another actor at the Karin, and they are evaluating the evidences. And if needed, they also make a forensic examination, and we have a special room at Karin where we can do these examinations. If it's an emergency, you have to do something immediately, but if not an emergency case, the social workers here, they are calling the woman in 24 hours to ask her what is the situation, how are you feeling, are you afraid, do you have somewhere to go, do you need protection, do you need someone to talk to, and they offer her help. Not everyone, of course, want help, many says no, but then again, there have been a new crime maybe in 3 months or something, and then they come back, and they always offered to have this help. And they also could assist the woman if she needs medical treatment, to go to another place somewhere outside, and the municipality could offer shelters, and we also have organizations who have shelters and support, NGO organizations. And what I think is very important as well is that we try to also have impact on the perpetrator. If he's convicted, he could get help from the probation service, but otherwise we try to motivate him to go to the municipality center for men. And we also have special programs for the children. So the children who are both subjected to violence or witnessing violence. We haven't talked about much about children today, but we all know that the children witnessing violence is very much at risk as well for severe problems. and it's a big risk that they will go on with violence as well. And here is, if we put the change, the perspective from the municipalities to the victim, here is what she's get. First, the notification, the interview with police, and then she got a telephone call and offered help. Then the forensic investigation and the police and prosecutor doing their job, and counseling for an injured party. Again, maybe new interview, psychological support, preparation for trial, and psychosocial support. And conclusions. National, local authorities, as we heard here before, and citizens and organizations can together contribute to solve problems and streamline governance. And predicarding is a holistic and client-oriented perspective, and I think it's really adopted to the Istanbul Convention. And it gave victims possibilities and opportunities to contribute. And it has a cross-functional and horizontal organization, and it provides an effective and cooperation between relevant agencies, institutions, and organizations. And we have made two evaluations of the project, and in this, both of them, the women says they are very happy that the institutions, the society act. She doesn't have to take all the actions herself. She's offered help. Like she's called and asked if she needs help. She's also very satisfied with the environment, because it's a very welcoming environment. It's almost done like a home, with a kitchen partner where she could have a coffee break. It's sofas to sit down in, and it's very nice interview and interrogation rooms. So the women, they say they like this, and especially like to go to one place and don't have to mess around too much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Anna Gustafsson and Margaret Olsen, for having managed properly your available time. Well, now that we have saved some time, the organization asked me to have an extra speaker, which is has also a problem of time, and with the permission of the next speakers, I'm asked to give the floor to the Minister of Justice of Libya, who would like to make here an addressment to this assembly. Mr. Salah Bashir Margani, to whom I ask not to extend too much the time, but to tell the essential of your message, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I assure you I won't use much of your time. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that most of you have been hearing about Libya, though recently not very good news, as the country seems to be sliding back to civil war. However, there is a glimpse of hope on the horizon concerning this important event, particularly the issue of violence or domestic violence against women and the victims of violence in general. The Libyan government, in spite of all what's happening around, and in spite of the layers of violence that seems to be coming on top of each other, particularly on women and families and children, have issued 2 decrees after fighting over them with the Assembly and then issuing them in the form of Council of Ministers decrees. Those decrees, the first one is 119/2014, for the first time recognized the victims of rape as victims of war. Rape was used as a weapon of war in Libya during the revolution, and we have established many, many cases where the previous dictatorship have incited and encouraged rapes by soldiers against cities that revolted against the previous regime. Those were the forgotten segment of the Libyan populations. They were suffering in silence, but now that silence has been broken thanks to the support that we have received from many people, including the Italian Parliament and this chamber, as well as countries like France, the UK, Netherlands, the European Union, and the United Nations. The decree recognizes women as well as men as victims, provide them with support, legal support, to go after those responsible, to hold them accountable, and to obtain damages as well as many other benefits. What remains, of course, is the issue of implementation. The second decision have established a foundation. This foundation or a trust will work on implementing this decision. We hope that this step would help peace in Libya and would reduce the amount of hatred that is fueling violence in that country, which is not far away from where we are sitting now. It's just across the Mediterranean. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for allowing me these few minutes. I hope that you would acknowledge and support this foundation, and maybe you would like to do a little bit research about what is going there, and this, what we hope, will be a pioneering step that would be followed by many other nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for the important news you brought to us. This is a very sensitive subject that interests very much. It's also contained on the Convention of Istanbul. And let me just tell you that the network, the parliamentary network, Women Free from Violence, will promote a debate on the end of this month in Strasbourg, exactly about the violence against women in armed conflict. And you know that rape is one of the most used tools of the ones who make this a weapon of war. So thank you very much, and you can count on our total support to keep increasing and implementing that type of measures. We are not yet on the debate. I saw someone with the arm. So we will continue our speakers. Now the third part of our session, it's dedicated to protection and waving a safety net around victims and women at risk. So we know that violence against women is around us, in the streets, in the workplace, at home. We also know too well that violence tends to escalate. There may be early signs that various forms of violence are becoming more and more severe. If victims are aware of their rights and of the risk they run, if they cry for help, what must be done to protect them? In other words, how to wave a safety net around the victims. So now we will talk with a very, very old friend, an expert who cooperated with the Council of Europe, with our Parliamentary Assembly on a very great number of occasions, and has a wide experience to share. Mrs. Rosa Logar, Executive Director of the Domestic Abuse Center of Vienna. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Jose. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, I'm pleased to be here at this conference, and I wanted to thank the Italian authorities, the Parliament and the government, and the Council of Europe for inviting me. As a former member of the Cavio Committee, I'm very proud to be here today at this celebration. I also wanted to take the opportunity to thank my colleagues from the Cavio. Several of them are here, for working together so hard for 2 years. I think it was worth it, and I think we can be proud of what we have achieved. I also want to express my gratefulness to the Austrian Minister for Education and Women's Affairs, Gabriele Battaini-Dragoni, who would have liked to come to this conference but was not able. She made it possible for me as an NGO expert to represent the government in the Cavio Committee and to bring in our practical experience in supporting survivors of violence. She was a tremendous support and made sure in backing me up in representing Austria that the convention would be a strong and very practical instrument and not only words. So I'm really very grateful for her support. I'm the director of a service that supports about 5,000 victims, mainly women and children, a year in Vienna, and we're trying to do our best, and we know how hard it is to deliver a really good service. This organization is an NGO, and it's fully funded by the government. That's one of the models, I think, that are promising, that the work is done by an independent NGO and the government is funding it. I'm also the president of the European network WAVE, and I wanted to especially also greet our sister organizations from Italy, from Dire, the Centri Anti-Violenza, who are very good experts and very committed and working for a long time. And I'm very glad that some of them could be here and raise their voice also, because as we know, the work of the NGOs is very essential to achieve progress in this area. And this is also recognized by the Convention in Article 9. It recognizes that NGOs are important, they should be encouraged and supported. I cannot speak long about how we should waive the safety net around the victims. We don't have time for that. You have already also heard a lot about it. I want to try to focus on 3 elements. One element is that the services should be specialized. The Convention says that general support services have an important role, like social services or health services, but you also need to have specialized services. Like in the health sector, you need to have specialized doctors and units. So specialized women's support service is one of the core elements of prevention, and as we have heard, the law itself is not enough because of the discrimination of women in our society. The access to the law is difficult. There are many barriers. It's hard to go this way alone. So you need to have an organization on your side, a specialist support organization, to do that. This organization has to be human rights based, because the Convention says that the human rights of the victim should be at the center of all measures. So what does it mean that this organization is human rights based? It means that this organization has to be independent from the state, independent from parties, independent from religious organizations, because otherwise it cannot fulfill its goal to stand on the side and work for the human rights of the victims, because you have to defend the human rights of the victims, sometimes also versus the state, because it can be that the victim is traumatized in the process again. You have to defend the right also against the institutions, who are very often very positive and willing, but not always. We have to face the situation that women face structural violence, not only at the hands of their husbands, but also by society institutions. And there are shelters in our countries that resemble prison, are similar to prisons. They are not human rights based. The women feel locked in there and they don't like to stay in these shelters. They say, I'd rather go home to my husband and let him beat me than to be in such an institution. So we have to be very careful if the help that we provide is really human rights based. My last point is the safety. We have heard about safety as a priority. Now, this is crucial. We've also heard that women's shelters are very important institutions and they can save lives. If you don't have enough women's shelters in your country, if they're too far away for the women, you have a problem. So we have to provide a net of women's shelter as a basic requirement. Even if you have a law, like in Austria, we have a law to expel the violent person from the home. Even then, you need the women's shelters because it's not safe in any of these cases for the women to stay at home. We have had women who were killed because, despite a protective order, because they were too much, the risk was too high. We even knew that the risk was too high, but we didn't have a space in the shelter. Sometimes it's full, so you have to provide more spaces to make sure that in an emergency situation, every woman and every child can find a place. So the protective order is important, but it's not enough. And a network of services so that no victim is standing alone is a very essential measure. And I have a little exercise or a test for the gold standard. My test for the gold standard is always, would you advise your sister to report a rape? This is one of my test questions. And the second is, would you advise your daughter to go to a women's shelter, and would there be one in the vicinity of where she lives? So these are two test questions that we can from time to time ask ourselves. And you will see if you ask yourself this question, you become ambivalent. You say, well, yes, maybe no. So unless we can be sure to answer these questions with yes, we still have to go on working. And it will take a long time because this problem is not so easy to eradicate in our societies. It needs years and decades. We have to continue. And my last point, we need money. We have to talk about money. We didn't talk about money a lot today. Without resources, let's face it, without resources, we will not make any progress. So we have to make priorities. I mean, I'm not against football, but we invest a lot of money in sports, for instance, without a question. Why? And when it comes to women's shelters or women's organizations, there is no money. So please, we have to be able to afford these basic services in our societies. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa, for your enthusiastic statement, as usual. You have to ask to the Secretary of State of Portugal, that is behind us, how she managed to increase the budget, the national budget, on fighting violence against women, even in an environment of recession and of a lower budget. She managed to increase it for 8%. And that's also a good message that this conference should give to the governments. So I'm sorry for making this intrusion, but when I hear the finance minister so worried with the deficits of the budget, I think that they never saw the economic research that was done and how much means for the budget all the expenses in the different fields that violence against women is provoking, on reducing the productivity, on all the expenses in the courts, in the police stations, in the hospitals, in the pharmacy, and so on. If they do that account, they will see that increasing for 8 or 10% the budget is even to save money for the countries. So this should be also a message to the government. Anyway, we continue to finish our session on the speakers list. Now I give the floor to Mrs. Michelle Levoy. She is director of the Platform for International Cooperation on undocumented migrants. So granting protection to victims of violence, irrespective of their status, even when they are undocumented migrants, is a major added value of this Istanbul Convention. I'm very proud because I also brought the contribution of the Parliamentary Assembly to put this protection to those type of migrants that are double, triple victims. They are victims because they are women, they are victims because they are migrants, and they are victims because they are undocumented migrants. So this is in the convention because we, in the Parliamentary Assembly, we fought for that and we gave that proposition. You have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bota, for your commitment, for the commitment of all of the mothers and fathers of this convention in the room. And also, I would also like to say it's an honor to follow Rosa on this panel for her long-standing commitment, but also because she sees women's rights and migrants' rights as interlinked. There's no difference. And actually, on August 1st, our organizations, together with the European Network of Migrant Women, did a joint press release to say how important the entry of force of this convention is for migrant women. So what I'd like to do here is just to outline how we see the importance of this convention, as Mr. Bota said, particularly for undocumented migrant women. Our network is based in Brussels, but we have members all over Europe and some outside of Europe. And they're mainly organizations that are working directly with undocumented migrants. And what we see concerning undocumented women is that there are additional barriers to everything that we've been hearing up until now of women who are experiencing violence. The policies that are governing the entry, the residence, and the employment of migrant women frequently disadvantage migrant women and increase the risk of abuse. We've done some research and talked to many undocumented women throughout the continent. One of the women that we spoke to was from Mauritius, living in the UK, who was talking about the migration control policies forcing her to endure years of physical and psychological abuse at the hands of her British husband. And she said to us, quote, "He took advantage of my status being dependent on him, and when he failed to renew my residence permit and I became undocumented, it helped him. I was always scared of the police because he told me, if you go to the police, they'll deport you. It was emotional blackmail, that they would take away my daughter because she's a British citizen, and if I was deported, I would never see her again. And how could I live without my daughter?" Unquote. We see also that detection practitioners are trying to control migration through detecting undocumented migrants, risk arrest and deportation of undocumented women when they want to seek justice. Immigration authorities might be the first contact, but often they're not informed about victims' rights. What we have is a situation where violence is reported, victim is deported. We have cases of Brazilians actually in Belgium who have told us that the organization they work with, cases of a woman who called the police because she was being abused by her husband, also from Brazil. Both of them were taken by immigration authorities, both put in detention, and both put on the plane together as a nice, happy, unviolent family, deported. We also see that women are turned away from shelters and other support services. Our newsletter reports on many different news items. We had a case recently of a United States citizen in Ireland who was separated from her husband. She wanted to move to a women's refuge with her children after her husband beat and sexually assaulted her. But she said that social welfare workers were hostile to her when she applied for emergency funding, threatening that they would call the police. And I think another issue for us is the lack of visibility of undocumented women in data. I think it's substantial that the FRA has conducted the survey, and the figures are alarming, as everyone has mainly said up until now. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a picture of migrant women for other limitations in the survey, but what would happen if we would? This is, I think, is an important question because the figures would be probably much higher. The studies that we do know, an NGO called CIMAD in France said that nearly 40% of 75 police stations they polled in Paris said that an undocumented woman would be arrested if she wanted to report violence. IMCON, an organization in the UK, said that 92% of undocumented women seeking support for violence had been threatened by deportation by their perpetrator. So I think that the question of 2/3 of women in the Frost survey who didn't report violence, for all the reasons that we know, would be largely increased when you add undocumented women to it because of the main reason of the fear of deportation if they do report. So what do we have in front of us? We have the opportunity in the implementation of this convention that undocumented migrant women can also benefit from many of the protections. But this actually requires a lot of additional practical measures. It's not enough to say that the law doesn't discriminate just because it theoretically applies to all victims. We need to address the discrimination at both the individual and structural levels through proactive measures in law and policies. We know as a network what this actually means as a challenge, because the past year we've been working on the transposition on the EU level of the Victims of Crime Directive, which also applies to undocumented residents in Article 1. And we know how difficult it is for member states to also make these provisions applicable to undocumented residents. But what we have done is done an initial legal analysis of this convention and all of the relevant articles, which we will gladly share with you, to see how we could actually implement this convention and offer protections to undocumented migrant women in 4 main areas. One is access to justice. What does this mean? For example, issuing and publicizing a protocol to the police, making sure that there's a firewall, that they don't have to report undocumented women. The Fundamental Rights Agency has actually developed guidelines on detection practices, saying that undocumented should be able to go and uphold their fundamental rights, also the right to be reporting acts of crime to the police, and the police should not report them. We should be using these as models. We should be suspending expulsion for undocumented residents until the resolution of criminal procedures. Ensuring burden of proof for undocumented victims of crime is realistic, accepting NGO reports as an example. The second area is training and outreach. There's been a lot of discussion already today about training and outreach, but we need to also bear in mind that all of the actors who need to be trained have to be aware of the specific vulnerabilities of undocumented migrants. There are some interesting good practices that we've collected in a report that we have here. It's available on our website as well, of local level as well as regional and national level good practices. And one of them is in an area of the city, for example, cities were mentioned as well, where there's large migrant communities, establishing cooperation between the local police and migrant communities so that migrant communities can safely report at the police. The Amsterdam city government has actually established this. It's interesting to look at as a good practice. Informing migrant women about their rights is also crucial. We have to think of the other language translations that are needed when we have to consider materials. The third area is shelters and services. Rosa brought up the question of funding. So funding is obviously an issue for all shelters and services, but concerning undocumented, many shelters are restricted from allowing undocumented access to their shelters because they receive government funding. So making the funding actually independent and allowing all victims able to access the shelter is crucial. The fourth area is a secure residence permit. Ensuring that laws and procedures don't tie migrants to abusive and exploitative relationships. This actually means considering protection clauses in legislation to allow migrant women with a dependent or irregular status to escape a violent relationship or a marriage. Allowing them to go and have an exceptional residence permit if they become undocumented because they are actually abused. This is actually where it's interesting to look at other good practices. In Spain, as Mr. Bota said, we could spend a whole day analyzing Spain's legislation, also for this aspect, because Spain grants a temporary residence permit to undocumented women when they are filing a complaint against their perpetrator. If the perpetrator is convicted, that can become a permanent. France used Spain's law as a model and now also has a model of its own concerning undocumented women. So I'd like to conclude here with two key words that I think for me sum up the way forward, as well as a lot of the discussions which I've personally found very enriching from this morning until now. So the first one is changing mindsets. I think we've seen that in the panel this morning. It was mentioned in the opening presentations as well. Women first and foremost. That's what we're talking about when we're referring to this convention. And I'd like to add to that, a woman is a woman is a woman. There's no such thing as an illegal woman. Terminology and how we talk about this is crucial. And we're actually launching a campaign, or we have a couple months ago, called Words Matter, where we're not just saying it's not only important to use irregular or undocumented in English, but we recognize the difficulties in other languages, which is why we've done a lexicon for all the EU languages of appropriate terminology for referring to undocumented. The second key word for me is opportunity. We have an opportunity here to raise this baby, as Mr. Bota has said in his little opening, which I think is a very important figurative sense, but it also shows that there's a long work ahead of us. One of the immediate starting points could be through the Grevio Committee to ensure that the 10 or more experts, at least some of them in the criteria, would have knowledge or experiences of migrant women, to ensure that because migrant women are so disproportionately experiencing violence, and because the consequences for them are also so disproportionately severe, deportation in the majority of cases, that we really ensure that at that committee that states parties consider accepting candidates who have this kind of a background. And I'd like to also say that it's just an opportunity for us as civil society organizations to continue this work together with policymakers so that we can end impunity for violence against all women in Europe, including migrant women. I'd like to just end with Marceline Naudi's ending this morning: change starts with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Michelle Levoix. And now, last but not the least, we come to the final speaker of this session. I welcome Mrs. Lawrence Joels, Mr. Lawrence Joels, Regional Representative of the UNHCR Regional Representation for the Southeastern Europe. Mr. Lawrence, you have the opportunity to complement what has just been explained by the former speaker. Thank you very much for giving us a last piece of food for thought before we open the debate. So you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Bota. Let me start by thanking the Italian authorities for having invited UNHCR to this very important event, and in particular Laura Boldrini, Speaker of the Italian Parliament. I would also like to thank our counterparts from the Council of Europe for having invited UNHCR to contribute to the drafting of the Istanbul Convention, and we're happy thus to be able to be here today also to celebrate its entry into force. UNHCR, the UN High Commission for Refugees, welcomes very much the entry into force of the Istanbul Convention, designed to be a key and global protection tool. And we do that in particular because it's the first time that gender-related persecution is explicitly mentioned in an international convention, confirming what UNHCR has for considerable time advocated for, that gender-based violence be recognized as a violation of human rights, but also as a form of persecution in the sense of the 1951 Refugee Convention, against which protection should be ensured. And it goes without saying that all states should sign, ratify, and implement it, as has been said so many times today. It's also a very important opportunity for UNHCR to further underline the urgent need for protection of women and girls of concern to us, so namely refugees, asylum seekers, and stateless persons. We're very happy that this has been so explicitly included. There are almost 43 million persons falling under the responsibility of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and a very great percentage of these are women and girls, as was so often said today. This is the case, for example, within the Syrian refugee population, over 3 million persons. In Europe, women and girls represent some 30% of refugees and asylum seekers. And I'd also like to recall that women and girls represent over 10% of the over 130,000 persons who have undertaken a very dangerous journey by sea, risking their lives in order to reach Europe in search of safety. Sexual and gender-based violence affects not exclusively, but mostly women and girls. Forcibly displaced women and girls are especially at risk and are affected in their country of origin, during the flight, and after arrival in the country of asylum. They often flee fearing gender-based persecution, including trafficking for sexual and labor exploitation, domestic violence, forced marriage, forced sterilization, threats deriving from honor crimes at the hands of their families or communities, sexual violence, and rape. In 2013, it was also estimated that some 25,000 women and girls from female genital mutilation practicing countries sought asylum in the European Union. Women forced to move are particularly vulnerable to various forms of violence during their flight by smugglers, by traffickers, by detention staff, by border guards, by reception staff, and unfortunately we continuously, and if I say continuously I mean every single day, hear horror stories of women and girls describing the unbearable violence, rape, and other forms of abuse that they were exposed to in the countries they crossed before arriving to their destination. Thus, it's hoped that also governments of countries considered to be countries of transit for women and girls fleeing violence in their own country take really serious measures to ensure not only protection of their own women citizens, but include all the many thousands of women and girls who are in flight attempting to reach safety elsewhere. But the violence does not stop once arrived. Women and girls often continue to be at risk even in countries of asylum, as forced displacement weakens existing community and family protection mechanisms and exposes refugee women and girls to the risk of a range of human rights violations, including, of course, violence. In June this year, our Special Envoy Angelina Jolie co-chaired a global summit in London on ending sexual violence in conflict, helping to put a spotlight on the issue and to galvanize public support. Last year, some 12,000 sexual and gender-based violence incidents were reported to UNHCR in 43 countries. And one can assume, of course, as was said so often today, that much higher numbers must be the case, given the many obstacles faced by survivors in reporting their ordeal. Traditionally, the interpretation of the definition of refugee is gender blind. Consequently, women's experiences of persecution because they're women, or the specific forms of persecution to which women are particularly vulnerable, and the possible gender dimensions of the definition as a whole are often not taken into consideration. If some national asylum legislation mentions gender or gender-based persecution as a ground for granting international protection, there is still, unfortunately, often a lack of harmonized and common approaches. And for these reasons, provisions on asylum have been intentionally incorporated in the Istanbul Convention. The Istanbul Convention has dedicated 2 articles to the specific situation of refugee women and girls. Article 60 on gender-based asylum and 61 on non-refoulement. Enshrine in the conventions important developments of international refugee law that previously were only in soft law and jurisprudence. And indeed, these articles provide a legal basis for a common and shared interpretation of key concepts and stress the responsibility of states, on the one hand, to ensure protection of women who have survived violence, but on the other, to prevent risks of violence that could further hamper an already complex process of integration. I'd like to quote the explanatory report of the Convention, which says that asylum law has long failed to address the difference between women and men in terms of why and how they experience persecution. This gender blindness in the establishment of refugee status and gender-based violence were unrecognized. There is no doubt that rape and other forms of gender-based violence, such as female genital violence, dowry-related violence, domestic violence, trafficking, are acts which have been used as forms of persecution, whether perpetrated by state or non-state actors. In relation to Article 61, the Istanbul Convention reiterates the obligation to respect the principle of non-refoulement, requiring that countries take measures to ensure that female survivors of violence are not returned to any country where their lives would be at risk or where they may be subjected to torture or inhumane or degrading treatment or punishment. Importantly, the Convention requires state parties to adopt legislative and practical measures to prevent and combat violence against women, as well as to coordinate measures through comprehensive policies. It establishes thus an obligation to introduce gender-sensitive procedures, guidelines, and support services also in the asylum process, and that for us is extremely important. This may include the establishment of appropriate reception facilities, training of all officials and service providers who are likely to come into contact with victims of gender-based violence, institution of formal procedures on prevention and response for staff working in refugee reception facilities, community participation for the development of prevention and response mechanisms, access to specialized assistance services, information in relation to gender-based violence, including on legal redress and rehabilitation, and then, of course, monitoring, reporting mechanisms, access to same-sex asylum, interviewer and interpreter, gender guidelines on the adjudication of asylum claims, etc. As mentioned several times yesterday and today, Italy was amongst the first countries that signed and ratified the Istanbul Convention, which has contributed to its entry into force. The transposition of the EU directives on qualifications and trafficking have been very important opportunities to establish mechanisms aiming at enhanced protection for victims of sexual violence and trafficking. With regard to other countries in the southern Mediterranean, Spain has ratified the Convention, Malta and Greece have signed it. National legislations in Italy and Spain in particular have included acts of sexual violence as acts of persecution. Generally, as UNHCR, we see encouraging enhanced awareness and attention on this specific issue. But we also see increased needs, particularly in the context of the current sea arrivals that often are only the end part of a much longer route to safety that, unfortunately, more often than not, is filled with undescribable violence against those attempting to reach safety, but in particular against women and girls. We're convinced that the way forward lies in further promoting accession to the Istanbul Convention and ensuring that there are no reservations in relation to Article 60 and 61, the ones that have to do that are dealing with refugees, as this can contribute to produce positive change and to effectively improve protection of women and girls forced to flee to seek safety. I'm finishing. We stand ready, of course, to provide expertise to states on how to effectively implement particularly these two Articles 60 and 61. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, for your important statement. In reality, Articles 59, 60, and 61, migration and asylum, is some of the most important added value of this convention all over the world. So that's why it's a golden standard, and that's why it's a reference worldwide. Now we have the debate. I would say that we have to recover a little bit the time that we lost in the beginning. You know, we had a delay. So we have 30 minutes for the debate. We will conduct this in the following manner, if you don't mind. I will give the floor for 3 minutes to put questions to the speakers, firstly on this part, then on this part section, then on this part section, and then on that part section. And then we move around. So to give opportunity to the whole room, not to be all concentrated on the same place, but to make a little bit of share. So let's start here. I see our colleague from Palestine, Mrs. Alastair, please. Where is the micro? No micro?
Here.
Oh, you okay, you have the micro. Yes, sorry. Everybody has a micro.
I'm Dr. Najat Al-Astal from Palestinian Legislative Council, also member of Equality and Non-Discrimination of Peace, member of Parliamentary Network, Women Free from the Violence. First of all, I want to thank organizer, especially Italian Chamber Deputy and Council of Europe. And also I want to congratulate head of Italian Chamber of Deputy for ratifying of Istanbul Convention. My question is about women and girls under conflict or the war or military actions, especially in the Middle East, especially in Palestine and all over across the world. These women suffer from fear all the time and violence, all kind of the violence, psychological, physical and sexual, and also victim to this war. Many of them are died or injured or displaced from their houses, suffer from lost hope for a future, lost their children and husband and relative. My question, what are your suggestions and the steps and initiative to protect and manage the situation of these vulnerable and poor women in the base of Istanbul Convention and international human law and other convention and resolution of Security Council 1325. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Madam Alsters. So now on this part, please, you have the floor from Austria.
Yes, I want to thank all the organizers too. I think that everything that's been addressed is very important on the Istanbul Convention. I am here today on behalf of WWPEN, Work with Perpetrators European Network, a European association that was forged on the base of a European network and that has been working for over 8 years with more than 26 countries networking around the theme of men's perpetration of domestic violence. Now we have all agreed that victims should not be held responsible for the violence, and this means focusing on the men that are responsible for the violent behavior. And we must always highlight that how the perpetrators are being held accountable for the violence. In April, WWPEN was founded with 19 European countries and more than 20 programs represented. We feel that the work that WWPEN is doing is in full recognition and development of the Istanbul Convention, as is also stated in Article 16, Articles 1, 2, and 3. Parties shall take the necessary legislative and other measures to set up or support programs aimed at teaching perpetrators of domestic violence to adopt nonviolent behavior in interpersonal relationships with a view to preventing further violence and changing violent behavior patterns. It's a quote from the Article 16. WWPEN shares the same definition of violence as the Convention and the position of seeing violence as rooted in gender inequality. For us, the priority of the interventions are the promotion of safety for women and girls, the promotion of accountable and coordinated work with perpetrators, and to fulfill internationally accepted quality standards. The first document that was produced by WWPEN was the guidelines on the promotion of perpetrator programs that have been used in many countries that have developed these programs over the past years, including Italy. The first center, CAM, and the national umbrella organization, RELIVE, both are inspired by WWPEN guidelines. Many of today's presenters have referred to the importance of engaging men and boys and the importance of perpetrator work. Still, we think that there is a slight shortcoming on the accent on Article 16 that we feel is a very, very important point of the Istanbul Convention. We need an integrated effort to include perpetrator programs in a reliable and accountable program to eradicate and contrast violence in Europe. We hope that the future initiatives will provide to include this aspect of the implementation of the Istanbul Convention in future initiatives. The safety of women and girls depends on the accountability that institutions and state have of perpetrator behavior. It's under 3 minutes. Behavior and perpetrator programs need to be accountable partners in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like that questions should be put to the speakers. This is not 100 speakers at the same time. So, please, now on this part, I saw firstly, I'm sorry, I will give them another turn around, but near to Mr. Magarat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Botta. I'm the Deputy Justice Minister of Georgia. I don't believe in speedy justice, but I will be as quick as possible. As Georgia is through the signature of the convention, so we have prepared amendments to 12 laws, and they pertain different aspects of what we discussed today. But I will focus just on one particular issue, especially in the light of the discussion. I would like to ask presenters to give their comments whether there is added value to have multiple discrimination as aggravating circumstance in the process of criminalization of violence against women. Because violence against women is a form of discrimination, and women are especially susceptible to multiple grounds, or so-called multiple or intersectional discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now on this part, please, on the fifth floor, fifth rank, please. Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Carol Hageman White. I've been monitoring the Council of Europe recommendations. Is that working now? Is
yes,
the
please,
microphone
please.
working?
Yes, please.
Yes. I have a comment, a point to make in regard to the section on prosecution. We've been reminded several times that this is a holistic instrument, the convention, which is its strong point, but it also means, like all human rights frameworks, that different principles are embodied that are not always in practice congruent and the same practical consequences. I think we should be cautious, and that needs to be acknowledged. I think we should be careful about saying that prosecution is for justice for women. Prosecution is about the perpetrator and about justice in society, and you could have a policy saying that it is in the public interest to prosecute all cases. But some victims of crimes in general have a strong wish for justice through prosecution. Others do not, and particularly with domestic violence and in family matters, many people do not feel that it is a matter of their personal desire for justice. If we are also talking about empowerment of women, then we've got two different principles here that may not agree in practice. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't prosecute, but I think that saying that prosecution is bringing justice for women seems to me to go in the wrong direction. It's about justice for society, and it's not always going to stop the aggression, and it's not always going to keep women safe. So there's different issues here that all have to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now on this part of the audience, someone who wishes to speak? Nobody? So now on this part, sorry. Oh, okay.
Grazie, sono Elisa Ercole, Presidente di Differenza Donna, gestiamo i centri antiviolenza presenti a Roma, finanziati da Solidea, provincia di Roma e Roma Capitale e dal Dipartimento Pari Opportunità. Noi volevamo ricordare che un grave problema per l'Italia è la copertura nazionale attraverso i centri antiviolenza, che come abbiamo sentito oggi e come è riconosciuto dalla Convenzione di Istanbul sono uno strumento fondamentale per applicare i diritti e per dare garanzia alle donne di reale uscita dalla violenza. In Italia abbiamo una copertura del 6% rispetto al fabbisogno che noi avremmo. Speriamo che tutti si impegneranno su questo, ne siamo certe. Grazie.
Thank you very much. Now on this, yes, please, Azerbaijan.
Yeah. Representative of Government of Azerbaijan State Committee. Diversification of life is accompanied with a change in the international law. Today, we see as the new institute, the prevention of domestic violence changed into the mechanism in the international law. Istanbul Convention changed the questions of the prevention of violence against women into the one of the main parts of international human rights. I will not say about the legislation adopted in Azerbaijan. We have special law, we have a special legislation, national action plan, and other made the change in our legislation codes in all acts. But today I won't say that we already created 3 governmental and 7 non-governmental shelters. It's about 10. Of course, it's not enough for these days, but we are doing this work. And I would like to underline the progress in work with IDPs in Azerbaijan. You know that it's much more than 450,000 women IDPs and forced migrants in Azerbaijan. Women, I say about the women, and they are going through the rehabilitation programs, IDP women, education, employment, and other problems. And at least I want to say that earlier I said that implementation is one of the main problems of the working in this especially. But for today it will be better to give the legal classes, legal courses maybe on such kind of direction for the giving much more information about the convention on the legal point, legal direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now on the last line there, it was level.
Sì, grazie, buonasera. Sono Titti Carrano, la Presidente dell'Associazione Nazionale Dire, Donne in Rete contro la Violenza. È un'associazione nazionale che rappresenta al momento 67 centri antiviolenza in Italia e, come ricordava Rosa Logar prima, sono tutti centri antiviolenza gestiti da donne e indipendenti. Nei centri antiviolenza non c'è soltanto un'accoglienza o un'ospitalità per le donne che noi non consideriamo vittime di violenza, ma in un momento, come dire, di difficoltà noi cerchiamo di sostenerle nella loro autodeterminazione, perché i centri antiviolenza sono anche un motore di cambiamento di una cultura che è ancora segnata da gravi pregiudizi e stereotipi in Italia. Siamo preoccupate perché ci sono pochi centri antiviolenza, poche case rifugio, i finanziamenti sono purtroppo inadeguati e manca un ministero specifico che si occupi di questi temi e soprattutto gli interventi legislativi che ci sono stati negli ultimi tempi hanno privilegiato, diciamo, lo strumento penale. Quindi ci auguriamo che con la Convenzione di Istanbul che ci sia una forte implementazione in Italia con un importante coinvolgimento delle associazioni di donne indipendenti. Grazie.
Thank you. Now on this part I have our colleague from Morocco. Please, you have the floor.
Oui, merci Monsieur Botta. En fait, on est fiers de Monsieur Botta qui représente en fait le relais des hommes qui militent en continuation en faveur de la question féminine. En fait, c'est juste pour en fait partager un travail commun, un combat continu des femmes qui sont en terrain au Maroc. On a une petite expérience, j'espère qu'on aura l'occasion aussi à étudier, à évaluer et aussi à la mettre en évidence, c'est-à-dire les comités de monitoring qui sont régionaux. Dans les régions du Maroc, le CNDH a mis à disposition, le CNDH, c'est-à-dire le Conseil national de droits de l'homme au Maroc, il a des comités au niveau de toutes les régions du Maroc, c'est-à-dire 12 régions au Maroc, qui en fait fait un travail, c'est pas parfait, c'est un travail en fait de monitoring, c'est-à-dire de suivi, d'évaluation, de respect des droits de l'homme. Et je vous avoue, en tant que militante, en tant aussi que parlementaire en relation directe avec ces associations, parce qu'en fait le comité fait constituer des ONG, des associations des femmes. La plus en fait active de ce comité sont les associations des femmes et surtout les femmes qui travaillent pour combattre les violences à l'égard des femmes. Mais on a aussi un souci, c'est-à-dire comment faire de relier ce qu'on a dans le code de famille, c'est-à-dire qu'on a des agressions au niveau sur conjugal domestique, pour en fait faire une synergie entre les institutions publiques, surtout le magistrat, et aussi le travail de ces comités. Il y a des expériences, mais on n'a pas encore en fait la synergie, parce que mettre en œuvre la synergie entre l'institution publique, indépendance, CNDH, et l'institution, c'est-à-dire le ministère de la Justice, le magistrat, et aussi la société civile, c'est ça qu'on a, et que en fait, je lance un appel, mais je pense que c'est un souci partagé entre tous, parce qu'on est pour le meilleur des femmes et des filles et aussi des familles. Je pense que si c'est en fait, on peut même organiser, penser, et c'est une recommandation à réfléchir à ce modèle marocain qui est en élaboration, qui fait ces pas un petit peu modestes mais courageux, et qui a besoin aussi à tirer leçon et à tirer expertise, et surtout de l'expérience européenne. Et j'appelle à attirer attention à ces expériences qui sont modestes, je dis, mais très importantes, et aussi modestes parce qu'on sont guidés, orientés par les femmes sur le terrain. Merci.
Merci bien. La dernière rangée, the last rank, please. You have the floor.
Merci. Je voudrais tout d'abord présenter ma gratitude et mes félicitations au Conseil de l'Europe à l'occasion de l'entrée en vigueur de la Convention d'Istanbul. Cette convention qu'on a eu en Tunisie l'occasion de présenter au mois de décembre dernier, et qui a été pour nous, qui nous a inspiré et servi de cadre normatif pour entamer notre processus d'élaboration d'une loi intégrale sur les violences faites aux femmes. Un processus qu'on a voulu participatif, consultatif, où les ONG, les institutions gouvernementales, toutes les parties concernées participent, et qu'on espère présenter le projet au mois de novembre. Cette loi s'inscrit dans le cadre de l'opérationnalisation de la stratégie nationale de violence, qui a 4 axes fédérateurs. C'est le 4e axe, et j'ai évoqué cela pour vous dire qu'on a en sûrement des difficultés pour la mise en exécution de cette stratégie. Des difficultés surtout d'ordre de coordination entre les différents intervenants, qui fait quoi? L'approche intersectorielle. Et je voudrais demander, je ne sais pas, à notre ami de l'Espagne ou à ceux qui ont présenté, comment dans vos pays vous avez pu assurer cette coordination pour assurer une meilleure prise en charge des femmes victimes de violences. Bon, on a commencé en Tunisie à mettre en place une cartographie pour repérer les différents fournisseurs de services, les différents intervenants, et un système intersectoriel, mais on est au premier pas, et on aimerait bien bénéficier des expériences réussies, des modèles réussis d'autres pays, surtout pour assurer le renforcement de capacité des intervenants, mais pour mieux harmoniser les interventions. Je voudrais aussi profiter de cette occasion pour proposer ou pour demander au Conseil de l'Europe de multiplier ce genre de colloques et faire participer surtout les pays de l'Afrique, ne pas se limiter à l'Afrique du Nord ou de la rive, puisque la Convention est de portée internationale, faire bénéficier aussi les pays de l'Afrique où les femmes sont confrontées à des violences de tout type. Merci.
On s'adresse aussi à Madame Battaini pour avoir plus de débats comme celui-ci, mais il y a beaucoup de gens qui viennent d'Afrique. C'est une participation comprouvée. Maintenant, I give the floor, sorry. Firstly, I had the inscription of the Secretary of State of Portugal for Equality. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also want to thank you very much for your intense work in favor of the Istanbul Convention, and to say to you all that Mrs. Botta's work was fundamental, it was essential on the process of Portugal ratification of the Convention in February 2013. I will take the floor just for 1 minute to answer his challenge of telling you all how we managed to have extra funding in such a difficult times. Try to demand for your work on the protection of victims a small percentage of the profits of the social games like Euro Millions and Toto Lotto. And you will see that even if it is a small percentage, it works. To finish, I would like to remember Mr. Laurent shows that Portugal indeed ratified the convention in 2013, and it was the first European Union country to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And congratulations on the formula. I think that other countries should also follow the same. Now, please, you have the floor on the 6th row.
I have the honor to present with you today on behalf of the League of Arab States. In our regional level, we launched the Cairo Declaration in 2014 in high-level ministerial meeting as opposed to a 2015 agenda. The declaration offers a regional framework and the provisions to end violence against women and girls. We are also following the implementation of the strategy of protecting women and girls in the Arab region in the time of peace and conflicts, based on the regional and international obligation. The Istanbul Convention offers a specific instrument for domestic violence against women, and we can provide reaching tools to our framework and the plan of action to end violence against women. For this reason, we'll be keen to share the Council of Europe Convention to our member states through the Standing Arab Women Committee. Now we are waiting for one of the Arab members to ratify this convention, and will tackle this to the most of the Arab countries. Thank you.
We also expect that can happen soon. I see that there is, on the bottom of the room, there is one demand, another one on this side, and I don't see any other. We should stop, because otherwise we don't have time. We still have to listen to the answers. So please, on the bottom. Yes, you were firstly.
Yes. Grazie, mi chiamo Flaminia Giovanelli e rappresento la Santa Sede, che è un osservatore del Consiglio d'Europa, e ringrazio molto per questo invito. Volevo soltanto, senza parlare per niente del ruolo che le nostre congregazioni religiose hanno per quello che riguarda la prevenzione e la protezione, che insomma ben conosciuto il lavoro che fanno soprattutto le religiose. Però volevo fare una domanda alla sovrintendente della polizia della Svezia e alla sua collaboratrice. Volevo chiedere se è prevista una qualche forma di assistenza religiosa o spirituale per le persone che sono poi assistite dal loro programma Carin. Si sa quale può essere il conforto che può essere dato, anche appunto un conforto religioso. Volevo sapere se c'era e se nel caso ci fosse, se ne viene fatta richiesta. Grazie.
Thank you. On this direction, please, at the end, please. Yes. You ask it. You ask it for speaking. Please. No?
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Nadia Bushnak, and I am from Jordan, founder and president of the Family Guidance and Awareness Center, and a former senator. Thank you, President. for organizing this important event. I am sure that this conference is opening new horizons for the eradication of domestic and gender-based violence. And I believe that we have to focus on sustainability of services and efforts, as well as collaborations. This is vital, these are vital in combating violence. In addition to involving youth, males and females, in the pursuit to end gender and domestic violence, GBV, because their efforts are very well essential. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The last speaker on this side. That's the last. We have to close here.
Monsieur le Président, Madame Meslem Siamer Mounia, ministre Solidarité, Famille, Conditions de la Femme d'Algérie. Premièrement, je vous remercie de me donner la parole pour poser à mon tour quelques questions et formuler des suggestions autour du dossier qui nous entoure ou qui nous réunit à Rome, Convention d'Istanbul. D'abord, l'utilisation de termes refuge me semble quelque part inappropriée car nous traitons de femmes citoyennes qui ont droit au respect de leur dignité. Combien même seraient-elles victimes, fragilisées par certaines épreuves de la vie, leur placement se fait au niveau de centres ou d'établissements encadrés par des professionnels de la question et non dans des refuges généralement consacrés à d'autres créatures, article 23 de la Convention d'Istanbul. Par ailleurs, j'aurais aimé qu'un art soit réservé à la situation de la femme lors de conflits armés, notamment lorsque des crimes de guerre en font une victime expiatoire. Ma pensée va également à la femme migrante. Le travail domestique avilit et que le traite des personnes, les crimes transnationaux organisés achèvent, dont Madame Michèle Levoy, directrice de la plateforme pour la coopération internationale sur les sans-papiers, en a parlé lors de son intervention et que beaucoup de pays occidentaux n'ont pas ratifié la Convention de travailleurs migrants et les membres de leur famille. Merci.
Merci bien. Now we are going to listen to the resistant speakers because most of them, they have escaped from the room. So I don't have them anymore on the table. So, but anyway, I give the floor firstly to Mrs. Giz Ladotir to make the final remarks from your side.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm afraid there are some of the questions that have been put forward here that I am not able to answer because my colleagues that was here on my right-hand side, they were maybe better equipped to do that. But I'll try to address at least one issue that was raised here by our Palestinian friend and also by the Arab League. I think, you know, when it comes to women in conflict and women as victims of war, and we were asked how can we protect these women under the Istanbul Convention and other human rights conventions and Security Resolution 1325. That's a good question. Because, you know, in war, you know, of course the parties of war, they are bound by certain human rights conventions. The Human Rights Convention do not, you know, shall we say, they still apply to this situation, and they should be, of course, held to account if they violate the human rights of the people. Like in Gaza, it's of course the responsibility of the conflicting parties there be it the Hamas or be it the Israeli government, to respect the human rights of the people there and not violate the human rights of women. And, but the thing is then how to hold them to account. There, you know, we have an issue, if we can say so, because one must admit, for example, that the Resolution 1325 does not have many, shall we say, measures to hold governments, state parties to account, to really implement the resolution. But now, as I mentioned, we have a new one, which is Resolution 2122, adopted last year, which actually puts more responsibility on the Security Council itself to really look into what are the parties, how are they implementing these resolutions. But like I said, this is, when it comes to conflict, it's always a challenge how to hold parties to account. And although these conventions do not cease to apply. But also I just want to mention here, because it has come up, you know, we have a lot of international conventions, we have legislations, we have policies, we have even action plans in many countries, national action plans on 1325. And you know, in many countries there is no lack of all these things. But then it comes to the implementation, and there we have a huge gap in many countries of the world. And that's where we really need to, that's an issue we need to tackle. We need to see implementation, we need to see actions.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Mrs. Montaglione, which after all, she was still here in the room. Please, final comment.
Grazie.
3 minutes, 3 minutes each one.
Rispondo velocemente a due problematiche che sono state poste da due interventi precedenti. Si è sottolineato il fatto che in questo tipo di processo e quindi di intervento dell'autorità giudiziaria la donna in realtà non vuole la repressione, ma chiede allo Stato e all'intervento dell'autorità giudiziaria altro. In realtà chiede di essere protetta. Mi sento di condividere questa considerazione. È vero, chi subisce, chi è vittima di questa tipologia criminosa è animata quasi sempre e principalmente da un interesse che non è quello repressivo, ma è essenzialmente un interesse protettivo. Per queste ragioni io sono convinta che la Convenzione di Istanbul, che accentua soprattutto l'esigenza di tempestività dell'intervento giudiziario per assicurare un'immediata protezione alla vittima, possa costituire un ottimo momento, un'ottima occasione per dare alla donna diciamo, la protezione e rassicurarla nell'immediatezza della commissione di questi reati. Questo significa che il processo penale deve arricchirsi di nuove funzioni e deve necessariamente essere adattato e modificato alle nuove esigenze delle vittime di questi reati. E qui sono lieta di avere l'opportunità di richiamare l'intervento che hanno fatto le rappresentanti delle organizzazioni presenti sul territorio, e cioè dei centri antiviolenza che operano nel nostro territorio. Voglio cogliere l'occasione per dire in questa sede come io personalmente condivido pienamente l'attenzione che hanno richiamato, perché sicuramente il lavoro in una reale attività di contrasto a questi fenomeni criminosi, ogni intervento resterà parziale, sicuramente limitativo, se non abbiamo il reale effettivo contributo dei centri antiviolenza. Si tratta di strutture che operano sul territorio in maniera estremamente professionale e ad esse va riconosciuto senz'altro il merito di molte delle battaglie fatte su questo terreno. Il loro depotenziamento, a mio avviso, è una sconfitta per le donne e rischia, secondo me, di tradursi in un inaccettabile arretramento dei diritti delle donne. Devo dare atto che i centri antiviolenza e le strutture sul territorio da tempo assicurano ed operano sul territorio nel senso di una effettiva e reale tutela delle donne, tutela sotto il profilo materiale, sotto il profilo morale, psicologico e anche legale, perché va detto che nel processo penale le donne, le vittime, devono godere e avere una reale ed effettiva assistenza legale, e quindi sotto questo profilo io auspico che chi ha il potere di intervenire si renda conto e percepisca queste nostre indicazioni.
Thank you very much. Now I ask to Mrs. Margot Olson to give an answer to a direct question that she had.
Well, I was very short before, so, and I have some comments to what you said. I'll try to be short now as well, because I've been a lot of questions. One was about how do you build cooperation, how do you start that, and that is really my speciality. We have been working since 1998, and we do it in a city, not on the whole country, but I think it's the same sort of work you have to do. And in our case, we have been working both with making sure service to have statistics, data, facts to show that we are not thinking that something are like it is a problem. We know it's a problem. We could say, this is the problem. We could see this and this and this. And I think that you have all these facts now is very important. But also need to have politicians with you. You have to work together with the politicians. And in Malmö, we are very happy to have very interested and engaged politicians. For example, last year we get 300,000 extra euro to work with this issue. And we didn't even have asked for it. They just say, this is an important issue, here you have it. And I think that is why, because we have worked with cooperation, we have shown that this is effective, we have shown that we can cooperate, we have built a cooperation between the authorities and the NGOs and different authorities, and they see that we do this, and then they also want to give us money because they know that we will use the money in a good way. So I think to build the situation and build things and develop and have a long-term perspective. You know that this is not a one-year project. You have to have an agenda and see where will I be in 5 or 10 years. This is how we think. I agree with you talking about the perpetrators. It's very important that we work with the perpetrators. And we have different programs in Malmö, both for those who are convicted, that's in probation services, and we also at Project Karin try to motivate the persons who are coming there, and when they don't have the evidence for conviction, we still try to work with them. We try to say, well, if your woman, your wife, your former wife is reporting you, then you must have some sort of a problem. Can't we start there? And then we try to get them in and work with them. Also, you talk about some of the immigrants and the migrant women, and you also asked about religions. We don't have special, we don't work special with religions NGOs, but we do have cooperation with different NGOs, both from different cultures and Swedish NGOs and NGOs working with shelters. In Malmö we have 3 shelters run by the municipality, and we have 3 shelters run by the NGOs. And I think it's very important that you don't say this is NGO question or it is a state question. I think you have to see that we have to work together. We need to do this together. And that we are complementing each other. And about the migrant person and without papers, one of our NGOs have got extra money for working with migrants without papers, so they could take them, where they could come there and they have the same right to get a shelter as anyone else. And on our shelters, both the NGO shelters and the shelters we have inside the city and the crisis center on Karin, we have staff which come from different backgrounds and speak, I think, 20 languages. So we try to find persons who both have understanding and knowledge and could easily talk to the women and to the perpetrators and to the children.
Thank you very much. Now I move to Rosa Logar. Your final remarks, please.
Yeah, I wanted to also address the question of the multi-sectoral approach, because I think what is very important there is that what the Convention also says, that we base the human rights and safety of the victim at the center of multi-agency work. Now that sounds easy, but in practice it's not so easy, because we have institutions coming together who are often very powerful, and it happens very easily that this power of the institution is overpowering or even disempowering the victim. Then we have institutions sitting together talking what the victim has to do. I mean, this happens in every country, in every city, in every region. So you have to be very careful. If agencies work together, you have to have this question, who is representing the victim's rights? If you don't have the victim itself, which normally you don't have, somebody has to clearly represent the victim's right in multi-agency work. Otherwise, the victim will be overpowered, and it's dangerous. So we have to be careful how we deal with our own power. And in Vienna, for instance, we have a multi-agency risk assessment and safety planning conference for victims in high-risk situations. And one principle is we never discuss a case of a woman or a victim without her consent. We are accountable to her. We inform her before and after what we have been discussing, what we have been doing. So it's transparent to the victim. This, to me, is the most important principle in multi-agency work.
I don't see Mrs. Levoix. No? Oh, sorry. We moved. Okay. You have the floor, please. Final remarks.
Thanks. I just want to pick up on, I think it was the person behind here, Carol, was talking about do we not always have justice for women, and she referred to the concept of empowerment. And just as a central line, I think, for the consideration of undocumented migrant women and empowering them to have access to justice, access to services, protection, etc., the only way to do that is through this firewall principle. So there's no sharing of their data with immigration services, because as soon as that's shared, everything else is practically impossible. So when we consider how to really make sure that this convention is applicable to women who have an irregular migration status, we have to think about practical ways to put this firewall in place. And sometimes that can be a city offering a protocol for how its services should be used. We have a lot of good practices on that. Sometimes it can be, I mean, obviously through legislation, but there are definitely ways to do this, and cities all over Europe are already doing this, as well as on the national level. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Jones is not here on the room. So I think that we are in the end of this debate. Let me just summarize in not much time, but we have managed to have 10 speakers, 14 persons from the audience. I think we could not do more and better in this short piece of time. Let me just conclude that I think it was a good debate. It was a participative debate. And I think it's also that we got the conscience that it's on behalf of all those women that for many years they had not the right to speak. It's on behalf of their children, of their sons and daughters that were also, as well as their mothers, humiliated and offended. And it's on behalf of those women who have suffered from all those scars that never closed, from all those aggressions, from all those bones that were broken, from all those black spots on the face that they have many times forgiven. I think it's on behalf of all those women that we are all here together and that we will continue this fight, and that we will express on the central plaza of our indignation that we are with them, with all those women, with all those victims. Thank you very much for coming.
Se lo facciamo?
Mr. Bock.
Bene, buonasera. Siamo arrivati alla sessione finale e vi chiederei di accomodarvi per consentire ai nostri ultimi due speaker di prendere la parola e poi di concludere questa giornata così intensa e ricca. Solo due parole di introduzione. Il tema della sessione ci apre al futuro, al dopo Conferenza. Il tema è la responsabilità di agire, attuazione e monitoraggio della Convenzione di Istanbul. E mi preme solo osservare come questo tema della responsabilità di agire sta diventando un keyword nel diritto internazionale a proposito della protezione dei diritti umani. Penso alla dottrina e alla pratica della responsibility to protect, e in qualche modo questa responsibility to act ci richiama alle riflessioni che si stanno facendo e ci ricorda come una delle conquiste maggiori di questa convenzione sia la definizione della violenza contro le donne come una violazione dei diritti umani, il che pone questo reato come un reato contro l'umanità e impone alla umanità e a tutte le sue istituzioni, alle associazioni della società civile, come abbiamo detto, alle famiglie, alle scuole, ma anche e soprattutto alle istituzioni pubbliche, l'obbligo di agire, reagire e di assumere la responsabilità In questo senso credo che sia stato molto importante ciò che ha detto in apertura la Presidente della Camera, onorevole Boldrini, ma poi ripreso anche da molti interventi nel dibattito sul dovere di sostenere con misure economiche le attività di prevenzione e di supporto alle vittime. Io penso che questo sia un impegno che i parlamentari presenti possano assumere nei confronti dei loro governi. E dentro le cose concrete anche che dobbiamo fare e che possiamo fare, ricordo che come delegazione italiana, assieme alla Presidenza della Camera, l'ho annunciato anche questo la Presidente Boldrini, abbiamo in animo di promuovere presso le università italiane un premio per una tesi di laurea, in modo che la comunità scientifica sia coinvolta in questo lavoro. Io penso che a fine mese noi proporremo a collega Mendes Pota, alla nostra vice segretaria Gabriella Battaini, di studiare come il Consiglio d'Europa possa cooperare alla miglior riuscita di questa iniziativa, ma io credo fortemente in questo. Nella mia esperienza professionale come professore universitario prima di entrare in Parlamento ricordo un lavoro straordinario che una nostra studentessa ha fatto su uno dei casi più drammatici di violenza su larga scala, lo stupro etnico nella guerra nella post-Jugoslavia, e come la ricerca che lei ha svolto, la discussione che noi abbiamo avuto in sede universitaria sia stato un momento di grande formazione, non per lei ma per noi che abbiamo ascoltato, perché quando parliamo di educazione su questo tema non è solo un processo che va top down, ma soprattutto bottom up, a partire dalle vittime anzitutto e poi da chi si batte per la tutela di questi diritti. Ma non voglio togliere altro tempo alla nostra discussione e introduco subito i nostri due speaker. It is my pleasure to introduce Professor Feride Akar, who is professor in the Department of Political Science and Public Administration, Middle East Technical University, Ankara, Turkey, where she is very active in teaching and doing research in political science and gender and women's studies fields. And apart from her academic activities, for 8 years she has been member of the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and since 2009 she is the Turkish delegate in the ad hoc committee on preventing and combating violence against women and domestic violence. Thank you for coming. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And let me just start by thanking you all brave souls who have resisted all the temptation to go out to this beautiful city of Rome on a Friday afternoon at this time to stay here to listen to the debates and to participate in them. You are really, really admirable. I would also like to thank the Italian government and, of course, the Italian Parliament and certainly the Council of Europe for organizing this momentous event. As a former member of the CAVIO, the committee that drafted this Istanbul Convention, I am particularly gratified, as my other colleagues here in this room, that all our work came to this very happy ending at this stage, but it's not really the end that we're very much aware of. And like Rosa, who talked earlier, I would like to express my thanks to the Turkish government, she expressed for her government, for their commitment, for my government's commitment to the creation of this convention and its support throughout the process. As a Turkish woman, I do not need to say that I'm extremely gratified that this convention associates the name of our beautiful city with this exalted cause of preventing and combating violence against women. So that's a special pleasure. Now, it's very hard to find something new to say at this stage in the debate. I have been asked to talk about implementation and monitoring. I will say only a few words about implementation because we have, I think, talked a lot about that issue since this morning. I will talk a little bit more about monitoring, also drawing on my experience as longtime CEDAW committee member. The Istanbul Convention, ladies and gentlemen, recognizes at the outset, and we need to recognize and celebrate this convention as a major step towards integrating and strengthening the international legal framework to protect women's human rights and combat discrimination against women. Therefore, it is really relevant globally, not only for Europe, but for the whole world. During the drafting and adopting process of this convention, significant energy went into ensuring that the standards set by the convention did not fall short of or contradict those in existing global instruments, mainly in CEDAW. In considering implementation and monitoring, the monitoring of the Istanbul Convention, we should always keep in mind this connection with CEDAW, and not only substantively with the provisions and with the specific provisions of the CEDAW Convention, but also we should keep in mind that this convention is based very largely on the work and experiences of the CEDAW committee, the output in terms of its output in terms of general recommendations, particularly General Recommendation 19, and its optional protocol decisions. So this is something that needs to be always kept in mind in the background of implementation and monitoring both. Now, as good a convention as we may have in the text of the Istanbul Convention, how effective it will be, of course, will depend primarily on how national authorities understand it, how much they embrace it, and to what extent national civil societies claim ownership of this convention. My CEDAW experience, and I think all of you in this room would agree, that ownership of the CEDAW Convention by the women's civil society in many parts of the world, in different societies, has been the main force in legitimizing that convention in the eyes of the general public. So this needs to be done for the Istanbul Convention also. Civil society is very, very important, and its ownership is essential for both domestic implementation and international monitoring, which I will be talking about in a minute. Now, as I said, many people have touched on different aspects of the implementation, so I will not go into those. About the first, we have been talking about the 4 Ps of this convention, and about the first 3 I will not mention. But with regards to the 4th P, and about that is the policy aspect, I would like to say a few things. Professor Chinkin earlier in her very eloquent intervention really examined and analyzed the issue down to its basic threads. I would simply like to say that the 4th P of the Istanbul Convention, which refers to policy, calls on states to adopt a holistic approach. We know that. And on one level, this means that states should have policies that involve all branches of the government, and they should apply integrated, coordinated, multi-level, multi-sectorial actions, which also means that they should be engaging very deeply and meaningfully with civil society. That is part of holistic approach too. And however, on another level, holistic approach means that the Istanbul Convention's recognition of violence against women as a manifestation of the historically unequal power relations between women and men, and this is a direct quote from the preamble of the Convention, has to do with this holistic approach. To put it differently, complying with the fourth P of the Convention requires that states grasp the nature of violence against women as a human rights violation which results from gender inequality, and that they respond to it as such. The Convention underlines the need for comprehensive and integrated policies that address not only the symptoms but also the root causes, be them economic, social, or political, of violence against women. National implementation, therefore, needs to ensure that all policies recognize gender inequality as the underlying social structural cause of the problem. This is not as easy as it sounds. We keep saying this, but when it comes to the national scene, many governments are not all that willing, let me say, to relate violence against women to gender equality and to grasp the notion in that perspective. So we have picking and choosing among issues and problems. CEDAW experience indicates that picking and choosing among issues and problems of gender equality, or responding to different forms of violence against women on a piecemeal basis, often renders the entire struggle ineffective. In other words, those policies that may bring forth or put a lot of emphasis on domestic violence, but simply do not talk or ignore sexual violence, is not going to be as effective as a whole-scale approach. And neither would be those issues that separate violence against women from overall gender equality principles. So this is one issue that I wanted to talk about. Now about monitoring. Let me say, by the way, before going into monitoring, let me say that it is important that these laws, policies, and measures put in effect refer to this intrinsic connection that I was just talking about between inequality, international human rights, and non-discrimination norms, and violence against women. This is very important because this is essential in order to prevent compartmentalization and trivialization of violence against women issues. Otherwise, they get to be not so important issues. And so this is something that is very, very important. Now about monitoring. A very important added value of the Convention is that it establishes for the first time an international monitoring body responsible expressly for following up and evaluating national implementation. Our experience from other fora, including CEDAW, shows that international monitoring can indeed have a very serious impact on the ground for a variety of reasons. New concepts and perspectives can be introduced into the national scene. Recognition can be rendered to hitherto neglected issues on the national scene through the work of monitoring bodies. And, for instance, harmful practices can be changed or can be impacted towards change through, and I will say this, through naming and shaming. And this is something that international monitoring brings about. The monitoring organ of the Istanbul Convention will be made up of two different entities, a group of independent experts, which is GREVIO, and the Committee of the Parties, which will cooperate. These two will cooperate and function in tandem. This mechanism will assess the implementation of the Convention primarily on the basis of state reporting for questionnaires that are prepared by the monitoring organ. It will have the possibility to conduct on-site visits if need be. It is entitled to make both country-specific and general recommendations on the basis of its observations. Monitoring organs are watchdog bodies. They follow what's going on and they, in order to ensure that national implementation is timely, effective, and consistent with the supranational norms. So, and they do so on the basis of information from a variety of sources, which is very important, including civil society, the media, and personal expertise of the members, knowledge of the members of these bodies. These monitoring organs become rich repositories of information on a particular subject, in this case on violence against women, in their own right. And their views and recommendations provide guidance to the governments, obviously, but they are also very important references for civil society action. Now, I would also like to say that the monitoring bodies are obliged to stay within their mandates set in the Convention. Although they're obliged to do that, they are considered authoritative sources for contextualizing and interpreting the legally binding text for specific cases. They can build on the mother text this way and have thus been known to function as progressive standard setters themselves. A good case is General Recommendation number 19 of the CEDAW Committee. In order to fulfill these roles well, these mechanisms, these monitoring bodies, should strike the right balance between loyalty to the mandate and commitment to substantive norms underlying that mandate, to the spirit of the Convention. The structure of the monitoring mechanism of the Istanbul Convention appears well suited for this purpose. It can perform well if Grevio and Committee of Parties function in complementary ways, because they constitute political and expert arms. An absolute must in this is to ensure an absolute must in ensuring effective monitoring, I would say, is independence and expertise expected of members of monitoring bodies. Parties to the Istanbul Convention should ensure that they nominate and elect independent expert members to Grevio in order to instill international and regional trust in the system from the outset of the process. Grevio will design its own rules of procedure and working methods, so adopting rational and streamlined working methods will be very important as the foundation of future work. Similarly, ensuring consistency with global and regional standards of women's human rights and existing jurisprudence will be critical, so this requires a knowledgeable group of people functioning in the Grevio. And in this context, Grevio operating with the standards parallel to CEDAW is indeed very important. So I have come in a way full circle to where I have started, and I'm ready to conclude my presentation saying that the functioning of the Istanbul Convention in tandem with CEDAW and with the CEDAW's recommendations, and in line also with the rulings of the European Court of Human Rights, for instance, will help strengthen the entire system, and that's what's needed. Ladies and gentlemen, the making of the convention was an experience, and it was an exercise in regional norm building. How and to what extent its scope and substance fit in with the global norms was therefore very important from the beginning on. How consistent national implementation will be with the letter and spirit of this convention, and to what extent implementation of the Istanbul Convention is treated as part and parcel of the state's human rights obligations are equally salient. Europe's success in wiping out violence against women will depend on how effective also the monitoring is vis-à-vis the goals and scope of the instrument. This convention has the potential to help create a Europe free of violence, I think, indeed a world free of violence, political will, informed national implementation, as well as fair, impartial, and consistent independent international monitoring are essential components for success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Akar, for your contribution and your commitment. Thank you especially for what you have said on the importance of the international monitoring in this field. And now I introduce the final speaker, Michael Garcia Bochenek, who is the Senior Director of International Law and Policy, leading on development of human rights policies and analysis for Amnesty International. Mr. Bochenek has also an experience from 1998 to 2006 in the field of Human Rights Watch Children's Rights Division, and also an experience as an academic at the Yale University School of Epidemiology and Public Health and the Georgetown University. So thank you for coming. You have the floor.
Thank you. We've heard, of course, already numerous speakers talk about the prevalence of violence against women around the world, and we don't need any reminder of that. What I think is useful to remember at the outset is that the convention is premised on the idea that violence against women continues to be a problem in Europe, in the member states of the Council of Europe, and that it's unfortunately not, doesn't distinguish among socioeconomic backgrounds, among different countries, and in fact, as Amnesty International's own research and the research of many other groups have shown, that even those countries that are thought to be the most egalitarian, we still see discriminatory attitudes, we still see practices, we still see discrimination in law persisting, all of which contributes to violence against women. The convention is obligating states to promote and protect human rights, and because this is a panel that's about action, it's about the action that needs to be taken, it may be useful to say a couple of words about what the meaning of these terms promotion and protection are. And we've heard from Professor Chinkin and from others a fuller explication of these various obligations, but I think it is important to recall, for the purposes of this panel about action, that we're talking about at least 3 different levels of state obligation. And one, the most obvious, of course, is the duty to refrain from acts that would amount to violence against women. But more than that, we've talked about the duty to protect those who suffer violence, and that includes the exercise of due diligence in investigating, in prosecuting, punishing as appropriate, providing appropriate reparation for acts of violence against women. And I think what's critical, what speakers have underscored in a variety of different ways, is the third layer of obligations, which is the broadest possible measures that need to be taken in order to prevent acts of violence against women. And of course, we know those must include gender-sensitive policies. We know they must be integrated and coordinated. They must be backed up by data that are reliable, that are relevant, that are disaggregated, and they must be backed up by financial and human resources that are adequate to deliver on these measures of protection. I'd like to focus the remarks I'll make on several of the critical areas to give some sense of what Amnesty believes is necessary for states to do in the area of action to promote and to prevent violence against, to promote the kinds of protective measures that are required and to prevent violence against women. So the first area that I'd like to highlight very briefly is the need for effective measures to address sexual violence. These measures, of course, include investigation and prosecution with due diligence, as I've mentioned, as others have mentioned. But I think it's useful to indicate some of the specific steps that Amnesty International has called for and that other human rights groups are calling for. And those include the following. One is that sexual violence against former and current partners must be addressed as a matter of law and practice. We have rulings from the European Court of Human Rights that go back to 1995 that established this point, but it's the case still today in 2014 that marital rape is not clearly understood in many parts of Europe. It's not understood as being illegal in many parts of Europe, and prosecutions of marital rape remain extremely rare. A second point to address sexual violence is that domestic laws must reflect the principle that there needs to be agreement to sexual contact for each and every sexual act that takes place. And what this means is that a woman should not be assumed to be willing to have sex just because of a previous relationship, whether that's marital or otherwise, with the alleged perpetrator. And it also means that consent should not be assumed from the way somebody dresses, who that person is, who that person is thought to be, whether that has to do with sexual orientation, for example, or a status, a category like being a sex worker. It also means that an assessment of consent in general should not be based around assumptions about typical behavior, what women should or should not do as a stereotypical norm. An additional area to address sexual violence is that states must put in place appropriate safeguards that ensure that evidence of prior sexual history and conduct are only used when that kind of evidence is clearly relevant and absolutely necessary. We know that previous sexual history is often misused to discredit victims and to discredit witnesses. We know, or we should have it seen set forth in law, that having sexual contact with a number of people or being considered promiscuous or otherwise transgressing established norms does not mean that a woman has consented to sex and could be assumed to have agreed to sex under any circumstances with anyone. There is an additional point that Amnesty International considers that it's worth mentioning in light of the ways that states respond when there are cases of sexual violence, and those involve the tragic instance where sexual violence, where acts of rape result in pregnancy. We have seen too often that women and girls who become pregnant as a result of rape or incest do not get access to safe and legal abortion services when they choose to get those and try to get them. And that is the case, unfortunately, in several Council of Europe member states. The denial of abortion in cases of rape or incest, or whenever the woman's life or health is threatened, is itself a human rights violation, and it exacerbates the original act of violence that occurred in these cases and reinforces the situation of inequality faced by survivors of these crimes. Another area is the urgent need of states to put in place policies that recognize and address the continuum of violence. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, other human rights groups have produced work that amply demonstrates that individual acts of harassment and other forms of discrimination, when they go unaddressed, can become a more general practice, and that in turn can fuel a general acceptance of harassment and discrimination and give tacit permission for the commission of acts of violence. So as a critical measure of prevention, states must forestall acts of violence against women from occurring by taking appropriate steps to address sexual harassment. We've mentioned, previous speakers have mentioned that achieving women's equality in law and fact is a key element in preventing gender-based violence. So I won't go into that further except to note that, of course, it is one of the critical themes that this session has addressed, and indeed it is critical, particularly the notion of challenging stereotyped notions of masculinity and femininity is a critical aspect of prevention and a key component of any plan to address and prevent violence against women. I do want to mention some specific measures about the area, within the area of migration. And those, even though some previous colleagues have mentioned these, I think it is important to reinforce the importance, particularly given the work that Amnesty International does, about the need to take particular measures to address violence against women and girls who are migrants. We've heard about the need for gender-based persecution to be recognized as a valid basis for asylum claims. We've also heard that the principle of non-refoulement must be applied to protect against return to situations of gender-based violence. The victims of gender-based violence whose migration status is dependent on marriage or partnership should also have the possibility of seeking assistance from the authorities without that status being called into question, without the right to reside being at risk for seeking protection and assistance. And in addition, as a key additional point, victims' access to protective measures, to protective services, should also not be dependent on residence status. And as a matter of law and policy, it is critical that states put in place effective measures to ensure that there are no such risks to migrant women and girls who are the victims of domestic violence. Let me close by just mentioning the critical aspect of ensuring effective remedies overall. There's clearly a lot more that could be said on each of these points, but I think that as we explore further what it means to prevent and to act proactively to address situations of violence against women, these and other areas must be explored in considerable detail, and states must continue to do what they need to do in order to make sure that this convention becomes a reality in practice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to our last speaker. Thank you also for the commitment of Amnesty International in this field and for having reminded us the importance not to discriminate between citizens and migrants in case of violence. E ora la conclusione del nostro lavoro. Non abbiamo tempo per discutere, ma certo anche i contributi degli ultimi speaker saranno fatti oggetto di riflessioni successive. Devo comunicarvi che purtroppo il Ministro della Difesa Andrea Orlando della Giustizia, chiedo scusa, non può essere qui come avrebbe desiderato a causa di un impegno istituzionale a cui non ha potuto sottrarsi. Mi ha pregato però di esprimere tutto il suo sostegno all'iniziativa. Il Ministro è persona molto sensibile a tutte le questioni di diritti umani e ha un confronto intenso con il Consiglio d'Europa su tutte le questioni che riguardano il nostro Paese. Il suo testo è però disponibile presso la segreteria e io penso che comunque il pubblico può aver avuto una buona idea della situazione della legislazione italiana dall'intervento della dottoressa Monteleone, che ringrazio perché è stato molto puntuale e che anche speriamo possa essere disponibile per tutti. E quindi io invito la dottoressa Gabriella Battaini a concludere i lavori di questa conferenza. La dottoressa Battaini è stata una delle protagoniste più attive, assieme a collega Mendes Bota e a tutti i parlamentari, dentro il Consiglio d'Europa sui temi della Convenzione di Istanbul. Io siedo solo da pochi mesi nell'Assemblea, ma ho potuto vivere direttamente alcuni eventi che lei ha organizzato con delle letture sulle storie di violenze sulle donne, così come anche su storie appunto di migranti. E certamente questa conferenza è merito anche suo, oltre che della Presidenza della Camera, del Ministero degli Affari Esteri, che io qui voglio ringraziare, assieme agli staff sia del Consiglio d'Europa che della Camera che del Ministero degli Esteri, oltre ai nostri interpreti che hanno sostenuto straordinariamente il lavoro di ideazione, di supporto, documentazione e anche di assistenza. Molto resta ancora da fare, quindi noi non dobbiamo solo esprimere gratitudine a Gabriella Battaini, ma dobbiamo esprimere anche a lei, penso, un forte incoraggiamento ad andare avanti. Il Consiglio d'Europa ha ancora bisogno del suo lavoro e noi la sosterremo, perché vogliamo che il tema della lotta contro la violenza contro le donne sia una delle priorità del Consiglio d'Europa. A te la parola.
Grazie Presidente. In effetti avevamo organizzato a Strasburgo con i membri del network che è diretto dal nostro attivissimo parlamentare che è Mendes Bota, uno spettacolo ispirandoci dal libro della Dandini Ferite a morte, ed è stato poi anche documentato questo spettacolo che ci ha coinvolto in modo estremamente profondo e anche un po' innovativo per i lavori classici di un'assemblea parlamentare. Bene, ho il piacere di poter concludere i lavori della giornata. Siamo tutti un po' stanchi, lo sono anch'io, e quindi mi permetto di farvi queste conclusioni ispirandomi dal testo che ho davanti agli occhi e che è in inglese, quindi ritorniamo a fare una ginnastica linguistica, passiamo dall'italiano all'inglese. Ladies and gentlemen, indeed dear friends, survivors of the day, we have come all together over these past 2 days to mark a very special occasion, because we are united by a common desire to end violence against women. For me, as I suspect for many of you, this conference has been an emotional and inspirational experience. It has been very exciting to witness the sense of achievement, pride, and joy shared by all of us who have worked so hard to see the Istanbul Convention enter into force. Over the past 2 days, we have heard vivid accounts of the awful experiences that many women were forced to go through. Some of these women were not helped by the authorities in the way they were supposed to be. Others could not seek help for reasons beyond their control. We have also learned about the requirements of the Convention in the areas of prevention, protection, and prosecution. We have heard how these measures are part of a comprehensive and well-thought-through policy approach. It is safe to say that a glaring gap has now been filled in the protection of women and girls against horrific forms of violence experienced by many women day in and day out. The Convention sends a clear message to society as a whole. It sends a clear message that every man and every woman, as well as every boy and girl, must learn that violence, any kind of violence, is not the right way to solve problems. Everyone must understand that violence against women will no longer be tolerated. And this is a very strong message from today's work. The Convention also makes sure that those who are the most vulnerable and those who have been neglected for too long are protected. It recognizes that there are women and girls within pockets of society who are often at greater risk from experiencing violence. Look into the future. There is no doubt about what still needs to be done. We need to embed the Convention within our legal systems, but also within the cultural DNA of our societies. Only then can we seriously deter these crimes and end impunity. We need to put survivors of domestic violence at the forefront of our efforts, not as victims, but as inspiring and resilient people who can guide us to make the right choices and decisions. And today we had here with us during the morning a very important person to remind that to us. We need to pool our expertise and close the gaps in our laws and capabilities, and we need to do so urgently. But that is not all. We must also recognize that women will never gain full dignity until their human rights are respected and protected. Violence against women is both a cause and a consequence of unequal power relations between women and men. Now is the time for us to act on behalf of women everywhere. We must use the Istanbul Convention to address, as it has been repeatedly said, in order to address the root causes of violence against women and domestic violence. The Convention makes this possible, as it is firmly rooted in the larger context of achieving greater equality between women and men. Dear friends, lasting success will depend on how well we manage to create and maintain efficient and sustainable partnerships. No single agency or institution can deal with violence against women and domestic violence on its own. An effective response to such violence requires concerted action by many different actors. All these actors were here today, and they could talk to each other, and we have listened to them. This is why this event here in Rome is so important. It is a powerful reminder that we are not alone in this fight. Today, as well as over the past years, we at the Council of Europe have witnessed the commitment to ending violence against women shown by a wide variety of individuals and entities. We have enjoyed the support of governments and parliaments, NGOs and intergovernmental organizations. I would therefore like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to each agency and institution which has helped us get to where we are today. I would like to thank each individual who has played a part and shared their wisdom, from presidents to practitioners in the field. Your advocacy, tireless lobbying and networking have helped transform the Istanbul Convention from a dream into a reality. A special recognition should also be made to the important contribution made by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, as Mrs. Brasseur said this morning when she mentioned the fact that you helped from the very beginning in the drafting of the Convention. We must also not forget the vital role that the Assembly's network of parliamentarians continues now to play in promoting the ratification of the Convention. Civil society has also played a leading role in helping us further our cause. We had here today two very interesting representatives from Amnesty International. NGOs, as I said, many of which are represented here today, have done a great deal to advocate for the Istanbul Convention, but also to help with its implementation. Your expertise and hard work has been invaluable. It is thanks to all of you that the Istanbul Convention has gone from being simply a piece of paper to a legally binding instrument. This is an enormous achievement. It has been a long journey, as I told you last night, from the very first draft to the entry into force, which we celebrate here today. But our work is just beginning. We cannot afford to rest on our laurels because there is absolutely no time to waste. The test we now face is whether we can make a difference on the ground. It will depend on how we will manage to create conditions for open and insightful dialogue. It will also depend on how well we make use of the resources at our disposal, on how innovative we are at using modern tools to raise awareness. In recent years, we have seen how technology is helping to bring abuses out of the shadows and into the center of global consciousness. From Facebook to cell phones, from Twitter to Tumblr, technological changes are helping to inspire, organize, and empower grassroots action in combating violence against women. Perhaps most importantly, these tools are helping reduce stigma attached to these abuses. This is something that must remain high up on our list of priorities. We need to be absolutely clear across the world that the stigma attached to victims is not only unjust, it is utterly misplaced. What makes the stigma of violence against women, in particular rape, even more intolerable is that it piles injustice upon injustice. The stigma pushes those who have suffered into positions of even deeper marginalization and exclusion. It makes it more difficult for women to retain and regain their dignity. It puts hope for a better future even further out of reach. So let us use the Istanbul Convention to rectify this injustice. The victims of violence have already waited too long. Ladies and gentlemen, protecting women from violence is not some luxury that we can deal when we have time on our hands. It is a core imperative for every human being in every society. Let us not forget that everyone has a stake in this endeavor. Everyone benefits from protecting women from violence. Every woman, every man, every nation. I leave this conference inspired and full of resolve for the future, in large part thanks to you all. At the end of our conference, I want to close one chapter and open another. The chapter we are closing is that of shaping the standards we needed to improve the lives of women and girls in Europe. Now that we have them, the chapter we are opening is that of their implementation. And this is a word that has been repeated throughout the whole day. There is a full consensus. It is my sincere hope that this celebration is the beginning of an era where we use the letter and spirit of the Istanbul Convention to guide us in our daily lives as professionals, as practitioners, and as private individuals. For no matter how powerful the Convention may be as a standard, it is not an end in itself. It is a call to action. It is a call on parliaments and parliamentarians to redouble their efforts to review legislation and monitor the effectiveness of measures. It is a call on local authorities and civil society to help maintain the momentum that we are now witnessing. I know that I am speaking for many of you when I say that we will not relent. We will not rest until we turn into practical implementation the many commitments and the tremendous support that we have seen from all the participants from this country here in Rome. Let us now get down to work to ensure that women and girls are safe from fear and safe from violence. Thank you very much for your attention.